Werewolves could swallow an entire person in one bite. This extreme change in shape and size was perfectly adequate to show their newly increased power. They were physically the strongest in all of the races when they were in this form. But Michael noticed that this wasn't the only thing that changed from their transformation. Using his drone vision, he saw Ernest's wolf form light up with ability power. His Dao heart had hundreds of threads that connected to different parts of his body, going from his legs, toes, and even his tail. This meant that every single one of his moves, be it a simple step, was boosted by ability power. By the very definition of ability power, reality itself was changing and morphing in order to make a werewolf's physical strength as powerful as ever, beyond anything mere mortal could conjure. Ernest turned his head towards Michael and the professor. "Hop on." Surprisingly enough, it seemed that werewolves communicated using psychic voices when they were in their wolf form. The professor hurriedly walked over to Ernest just as he bent down on the ground, allowing them to mount up to his head. Michael followed along while secretly observing a werewolf's ability power from up close. This reminded him of his quantum step. Those techniques that Harbinger showed him also used ability power to strengthen his physical strength above that of what was normally possible, i.e., being able to move faster than the speed of light. So there should be no difference in how he used his technique and how the werewolves moved with theirs. But he noticed that there was a difference. It was subtle, but he saw that the threads of ability power in Ernest's body weren't actually in his body. The threads acted like actual threads, puppeting Ernest's limbs and giving it more power. Meanwhile, his quantum step and quantum slash were both being powered by ability power that was coursing through his veins. The power was coming straight from his hands. The werewolves also need less ability power to function. Because they were coming straight from their Dao hearts, they didn't need an enormous amount of ability power like his quantum techniques. It meant lesser power overall compared to his moves, but better reliability. For example, Ernest just needed a single thread to empower one of his legs. But Michael had to use hundreds of threads, all tied together, to get it to course through his veins and empower his body to create the quantum techniques. But how strong are the werewolves? Just as he asked that, Ernest suddenly voiced out a warning. "Hold on to my fur," he said before suddenly accelerating forwards faster than a sports car. The pine trees around them flashed by like a blur as Ernest began weaving through the forest expertly. Even at this insanely fast speed, he was able to avoid any obstacles with ease. They're this fast and agile. Thankfully, he had retrieved his drone before Ernest ran off, or else it would have been left behind in the Goldblood tribe. Meanwhile, for the professor, he had to hold on for dear life as Ernest took him for a wilder ride than a roller coaster. His legs were flailing behind him as they zigzagged their way across the werewolf forest. "I'm slipping," the professor shouted. "Don't worry, Professor. My brothers will catch you if you fall," said Ernest telepathically. The other Goldblood werewolves following behind them howled in unison. It looks like Chief Klaus brought the armada with him. The professor was too worried about his own safety to wonder how Michael could hang on to Ernest with just one hand. Not even 2 minutes had passed before they came to a stop. The professor was still clinging tightly on Ernest's fur, not even noticing that they were already in front of a draconian tower. One of the werewolves walked towards him, licking his head to appease his nervousness, causing his messy white hair to become slicked back with gel. "Professor, we're here," Michael said. "The antique, remember?" Right, the antique, the ancient roar." Michael's reminder seemed to have finally woken the professor up from his stupor. He shook his head and resumed that crazy look in his eyes. They both turned their head forwards, seeing a giant stone brick tower reaching high up in the skies. It was like one of those buildings where one would find a princess at the top and a real dragon guarding it. But these draconic towers look thin. How can a dragon even fit inside? There isn't even a door that leads inside. Just as he thought that, a red portal suddenly appeared right in front of them. "Chief Klaus, do I take this as an invitation to war?" A man with red hair and thick, wild eyebrows walked towards them with a great big OL smile on his face. His demeanor would make everyone think his previous words were meant as a joke. But those who knew anything about Draconians would know that they could have easily meant it as real. I would think you've already asked for war given your obsession with hiding the antique, Chief Klaus said telepathically. A gigantic gray wolf, bigger than even that of Ernest, with multiple bald spots and scars around his body, walked towards the red-haired man. Michael couldn't help but raise his brow as he saw Chief Klaus' wolf form. He didn't expect such a grand transformation, given how the chief couldn't even walk straight while he was human. But a chief was a chief after all. Please, you're giving the wrong impression with our new friends here, said the red-haired man. Forgive our little banter. We've just missed each other. That's all, right, Chief Klaus? The scarred wolf just growled. Anyway, my name is Zoviru, and you're Professor Lichtenstein. Correct. The professor nodded. That's right. And you're the guy with the antique? Correct. Ha 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 ha. I like you already, Professor. Michael didn't know if the professor was just that bold, or he simply didn't care. He noticed that the other werewolves from the Gold-Blood tribe, except for Chief Klaus, all had their fur standing up, as if wary of this red-haired guy 5 times smaller than them. The antique. Did you really crack it? The professor asked. Zoviru smiled, giving no indication as to what the truth really was. I hardly think this is the right place to discuss such important matters. Why don't we go inside my tower? Of course, you'll have to turn back into your human form if you want to join. The professor didn't hesitate and walked towards the red portal. But Chief Klaus blocked him with a single paw. Wait, Professor. We can't protect you if you go in alone, Chief Klaus warned. Their pocket dimension completely blocks the lunar light. You really think that I would do something to the professor? Zoviru asked, with a tone as if he was really hurt. Bring the antique here and let us have the professor inspect it. In neutral grounds so we can be sure there's no funny business, Chief Klaus demanded. Ha ha ha. Or else, Zoviru asked, excited. It was as if he was just waiting for a brawl. Chief Klaus growled. Or else you'll feel the wrath of the Gold-Bloods under the full moon. Wolves. Ernest and the other werewolves growled, sending a visible shockwave that ruffled Zoviru's extravagant red-scaled cloak. But the man himself remained smiling. You know you can't afford a full-scale war against us, said Chief Klaus. I feel draconic gazes from the other towers, just waiting for a chance. For a brief second, Zoviru seemed to finally show a change in expression. He looked to be on the verge of relenting to the Gold-Blood chief's demands. But just then, a woo! Another set of howls echoed off from the distance. Michael and the others turned their heads back from where they came from, seeing a pack of gigantic wolves running towards them at full speed. The one leading them, a brown wolf whose fur was filled with symbols that littered around his body, lunged towards them. Its eyes were blood red under the light of the moon. Growl! Chief Klaus intercepted the giant brown wolf, meeting him in the skies. The two used their reality-altering physical strength to keep themselves afloat, fighting on nothing but the air beneath their paws. Just as the two were about to meet under the moonlight, the brown wolf stepped to the side and opened its jaws wide, intending to bite at Chief Klaus' left leg. Chief Klaus countered with a swift turn around, protecting his limbs. Both gigantic wolves then clashed their heads in the air, their fur creating sparks upon contact. Even without using his drone vision, Michael could feel immense ability power emanating from that one single clash. With such a simple attack, both of them showed powers equaling that of a 9th-stage body formation magnetic. Michael could only guess that their real strength must be above that. You! Chief Klaus shouted. What are you doing here? The brown wolf snarled. Come on, brother. You think I wouldn't come to my ally's rescue with you hounding him in front of his tower? Michael already guessed it, but the brown wolf turned out to be Lupin, the chief of the Brown Blood tribe and Klaus' blood brother. Behind Lupin was the other brown blood werewolves, ready to go in an all-out war against the Gold Blood tribe. The two tribes were in a standoff, snarling at each other. A single sneeze will set them off like hounds. But despite facing a draconian and their rival tribe, Chief Klaus and the other Gold-Bloods didn't back off. Instead, they became even wilder, growling and snarling with intent to sacrifice their lives if they had to. I promise you this. We'll all find ourselves buried in this place if you don't give us the antique. Now, Chief Klaus' words did not mean he would win the war against them. Instead, he assured them that there would be mutual destruction if a war came to be. And judging from the faces of Zoviru and Lupin especially, they knew that the old limping werewolf was serious. The Gold-Bloods were nothing if savage. Michael started to think of an escape route if things really did go south. "Professor, are they really going to have an all-out war?" The professor leaned in towards him. "I don't know, but I wouldn't worry. They wouldn't dare battle it out here. Zoviru is not bloodthirsty. Most dragons aren't. They appreciate entertainment more than fighting. And for now, he finds entertainment in teasing Chief Klaus here with war." Just as the three beastfolks were in a standoff, Michael suddenly felt another presence approaching them from the side. "I'm afraid that I'm going to have to intervene." A young man in his late teens or early 20s with striking green hair approached them. Michael didn't recognize him, but the others surely did. "Sergio Aubert. Where's your father?" Chief Klaus growled. "My father originally sent me here to oversee my little brother's performance in the swordsman tournament. But as you all know, something interesting happened with that little earthquake." As it turned out, Sergio was the older brother of Mauricio Aubert. Michael saw great resemblance between the two. "Chief Klaus," Sergio called out, "you cannot force Zoviru to give you the antique. We have the upper hand now." It wasn't just Zoviru and the Brownblood tribe they were fighting against. Now it was the Aubert company as well. Chief Klaus knew this and could only grumble to himself. He could still fight if it progressed to that, but even he knew that going against three factions was too much even for him. It looked like they weren't going to get the antique this time. "Ah!" Suddenly Zoviru sighed. "Why did you have to ruin my fun? Now Klaus wants to back off. That's it. Show's over. I'm ready to give the antique now." Sergio and the werewolves were surprised at Zoviru's sudden words. "What? What fun is it to fight when we're clearly overwhelming them? That's boring. Instead, I'm planning to give the antique to any of you. I have no need for it anyway." The professor found that curious. "Why? I've had the antique for a while, studying, testing it, but it has never made a reaction from all my prodding. It's clearly not meant for me. I would rather give it to one of you, and watch as you all fight each other for its possession." Zoviru then walked back to his red portal and put his hand through it. A second later he brought it out, carrying something in his hands. The professor's eyes immediately widened. Just from the sheer grandiosity of the object, he immediately knew that it was a genuine remnant from the ancient era. It was the antique. It was a large black tibia bone from a mythical beast's legs as large as Zoviru himself. It was very thick, where even a draconian's hands couldn't grab a hold of it properly. "This is the antique," Zoviru announced. The professor immediately stepped forward, the inner historian within him unable to hold on any longer. The fact that the antique was right in front of his eyes made him completely forget about the conflict unfolding around him. Michael followed after the professor, using his identity as Kyo, the historian student. "It has a lot of cut marks," he said, talking about the numerous scratches on the otherwise pristine-looking white bone. It looked like the bone became a sword-cutting practice dummy for a long time. "That's not scratches," the professor muttered, slowly putting his hands on the bone. "No modern weapon can even make a single scratch on a mythical beast's bone. These are words. That's the ancient human's language." As soon as the professor's hands touched the bone, the letters suddenly lit up with a golden light before the professor recoiled his hands away. A single drop of blood was left behind where he touched it, which was slowly being absorbed directly into the bone. It took a moment before the bone's golden glow dimmed, showing that the professor wasn't the one it was looking for. "I've tested this out on other people," Zoviru said. "The bone accepted none of them, including me. But just recently, it reacted. It resonated with something that caused that earthquake." Everyone stared at the bone. They all thought that Zoviru cracked the antique which caused that strange event. But if it wasn't him, then who? "What do the writings say, Professor?" Chief Klaus asked. Professor Lichtenstein was already well on his way to deciphering the hidden meaning between the seemingly random scratches on the bone. He stayed silent while Michael did a little bit of research himself. ChatJK5, can you try and decipher what's written? Without any previous knowledge of the ancient era, as well as the lack of context surrounding the piece of literature, translating it into a modern one will be hard to do. It will take me a few minutes at least to try and go through the different iterations of possible meanings. ChatJK5 made it seem like she failed just because it would take her a few minutes to decipher the words. Everyone turned silent as they gave the professor the space he needed to get to work. Then finally, Michael got an answer from ChatJK5. It is incomplete, but the text seems to be talking about a lost inheritance only found after an awakening. There does not seem to be any text about ancient roars. Just as Michael was about to say something, the professor suddenly spoke up. It's saying something about inheritance, and that it is something that only those who awakened it can claim it. Michael was surprised that the professor's translation was almost exactly what ChatJK5 said. The fact that he could go toe-to-toe with a super AI like ChatJK5 meant that he was truly someone to be admired when it came to anything history-related. Is it the ancient roar? Lupin asked excitedly. The professor tilted his head. Not exactly. It doesn't speak of the ancient roar. It's weird. The text is very hard to decipher since I still need some context clues in order to fully get its meaning. But what I can be sure about is that the inheritance that they're talking about doesn't just apply to draconians, werewolves, or any other beastfolk. It can also apply to humans. Sergio Aubert perked up. Is that true, Professor? I'm almost 100% sure. The word they used for the inheritor is something that completely encompasses all living beings, not just one specific group. They just have to be competent. Seeing this opportunity laid out in front of him, Sergio immediately turned towards Zoviru. Please give us the antique, Zoviru. My father will greatly appreciate this. You can be sure that we'll continue cooperating with any business that you might need, he assured the Draconian. But this didn't get the response that he expected. He will appreciate any business that comes from me, not the other way around. Don't forget that, boy, reminded Zoviru. Sergio immediately pivoted. I understand. But we Auberts clearly have the best chance in awakening this inheritance from the antique. You're overestimating yourself and your family, said Chief Klaus. But Sergio was confident in his words. I wasn't exaggerating, Chief Klaus. We are one of the most talented humans on this earth. My little brother has shown that even in the future generations, the Aubert Company will continue to grow and become a conglomerate in the future. Isn't that right, Chief Lupin? The Brown Blood Tribe chief could only stay in silence. He believed that Sergio was right. Mauricio Aubert was one of the most talented youngsters he has ever seen. But he also couldn't say that out loud because it would only give Sergio more credibility, which would be like personally handing him the antique. Is he not the best in your swordsman tournament? Sergio asked. In fact, I am so confident of my little brother that I am willing to stake our claim of the antique on the basis that Mauricio will come out on top of any tournament that you put him in. Chief Klaus, put him in competition against any of your youngsters. Chief Lupin, I believe you're already doing that. As for Zoviru, I seem to remember you giving him your praises as well. Is that not enough evidence to show that maybe, just maybe, Mauricio, and in extension, our whole family is the one most qualified to have the antique? Sergio's words were filled with a lot of confidence and a lot of boasting. But the crazy part was that none of them were disagreeing with him. Of course, Mauricio wasn't actually the most talented youngster in the whole world. But he was the one most talented in their circle of allies. Sergio was betting on the fact that these leaders would rather give the antique to someone they know, rather than someone from their rival groups. And it seemed to have been working. But who can study this antique but me? Said the professor. This belongs to me. Sergio nodded. Sure, Professor. After we have done our own research on the antique, you can have it all on your own. Now, the professor had no reason to doubt the Auberts as they seemed quite honorable according to other people. But the way Sergio worded it made it seem like the professor wasn't actually going to get the antique. They could just say they weren't finished with their research and delay giving it to him. I can assure you, Professor, that you will have it. If by the end of the year and we haven't given it to you yet, then may God himself strike us down. I can sign a contract with all of you. indicating that if I did not honor my promise, then you all have a reason to either seek compensation or justice. That was good assurance. The professor would just have to wait for a year, and then he'll have the antique for the rest of his life. But this wasn't good for Michael. He wanted the antique now. If it was tied to the ancient humans and the era they were in, then maybe he could be the one to uncover it. And if he also waited at the end of the year, then the whole of New Sparta would be gone by then. He had to say something. But Mauricio hasn't won yet, has he? He asked out loud. Excuse me? Sergio asked, almost laughing. You said that your family deserves the antique because Mauricio is the best talent there is. But what if he isn't? What if he lost in the swordsman tournament? Sergio was stunned for a second. He didn't think that anyone would say those words, especially not from Kyo, who just seemed to be the professor's protege. Of course he's going to win. Haha. Is this even a question? Even the other leaders stayed silent. In all likelihood, Mauricio would win. Only Michael could see that the possibility for that wasn't exactly 100%. It's more like 0. Then would you like to bet on that? If Mauricio loses, then you forfeit all claim to the antique. That's what I said, Sergio confidently replied. Meanwhile, back in the swordsman tournament, a young teen with green hair, Mauricio Aubert, was looking at the list of all the final participants in the tournament. And as he skimmed through the names, there was just one person he couldn't see. Where's Pietro? He asked. That guy was the only real competition he had. He's eliminated, someone replied to him. Ha ha ha. Really? Then this competition is easier than I thought. The win is basically mine. The female werewolf in charge of Jaku looked at the opponents lined up for the demi-human. She bit her lips. 2 opponents. Can he do this? She looked at Jaku, who was still laying down on the grass after all this time. Thankfully, he wasn't asleep. However, he was just biting on a blade of grass, enjoying his time as if the tournament wasn't currently ongoing. Get up. You have to fight 2 opponents this time, she said. Ugh, he groaned. Fine. Where are they? He asked. Then, the female werewolf pointed in 2 different directions with her hands. One of your opponents is waiting for you there down by the valley, seated as the number 10. And your other opponent is over there by the thick forest, seed number 9. Jaku looked back at her, scratching his eyes. Huh? Which one am I supposed to fight first? Both, she replied. At the same time, you have to defeat them within the time that a werewolf's fur will burn. If you don't defeat both of them by then, you're eliminated. What? Jaku grumbled. What kind of tournament is this? He noticed that one of his opponents was about half a kilometer away from his current position, while the other was another half a kilometer on the opposite side. To win this round of the tournament, he had to defeat one opponent, travel by a kilometer, and defeat the next one, all under a time limit. Are you serious? He asked. Do I really have to travel all that way? Can't they just have the arenas right next to each other? Or better yet, can't I fight them together? Jaku wasn't complaining about the fact that he had to defeat 2 opponents in a few minutes. He was complaining about the fact that he had to walk all that way in between. That was a pain in the ass. You're fighting against opponents seated in the top 10, and you want to fight them together? The female werewolf asked incredulously. In the time limit imposed, that's basically impossible for most. And besides, those are the rules set by Chief Lupin. He isn't here right now, so you can't ask for an exception. Not that he'd give you that anyway. Jaku slumped back down on the grass, unwilling to do it. Do I take this as your forfeiture? After sighing, Jaku forced himself up. Ugh. Fine, he said. Then you better go. They have already lit the fur in both of your battles, she said. Judging from the rate of burn, a single strand would last about 2 minutes each. He had only that amount of time for this round, and he'd already spent the precious few seconds grumbling to himself. Eventually, though, Jaku arrived in the arena, having spent about 30 seconds jogging there. You're finally here, the werewolf judge said. Your opponent is the 9th seed. Jaku raised his hand. Spare me the details. Let's just get this over with. His opponent, A nameless man wearing a ponytail and wielding a long sword, frowned upon hearing this. He was in the top 10. He couldn't believe that he would get disrespected from his opponent that was in the last place of the seating. You will regret. But before he could even finish his threats, Jaku suddenly charged forwards, with blue lightning arcing across his body. His opponent, surprised with this kind of speed, hurriedly tried to block with his longsword. The two blades clashed, sending sparks. Jaku's opponent took half a step back, positioning himself for a counterattack. But Jaku was faster. He performed a barrage of slashes that completely overwhelmed his opponent. It only took a couple of seconds before Jaku was able to break his opponent's stance, parrying the longsword away from the body and allowing for a quick attack in the torso. Jaku performed a slash, creating a cut on his opponent's chest. And then it was over. His opponent fell to his knees, clutching his injury, no longer able to go on. The werewolves watching this couldn't believe their eyes. The fight was over that fast. The only one who had an inkling that this would happen was the female werewolf. Jaku was unbelievably fast, giving his opponents no time to even process what was happening. Ugh! Now I have to walk all the way there? Stupid tournament rules, Jaku grumbled. He sheathed his katana and began stomping his foot angrily towards his next opponent. Meanwhile, the werewolf judge was still stunned. The winner is... He didn't even know Jaku's name. Finally, I was getting bored waiting for you. Jaku was welcomed with a snarling face from his opponent, who was just as unhappy about the situation as him. Except, his opponent wasn't grumbling about having to walk a kilometer for the fight. He was grumbling because he had to fight someone at the very bottom of the seed. A useless fight, he thought. Can we get this over with? His opponent asked. You're reading my mind. Let's just fight, Jaku replied. As soon as the werewolf judge howled, the fight officially started. Jaku's opponent rushed towards him, barely even holding his sword. Clearly, Jaku was being underestimated once again. Blue lightning arced on Jaku's scales as he activated his innate skill, increasing his speed multiple-fold. His opponent made a simple slash, his face making his thoughts obvious. He won't be able to dodge this. But with a simple adjustment of his posture, Jaku evaded his opponent's blade by the slightest margin. Surprised, his opponent thought Jaku got lucky. So, he performed another slash right down the middle of Jaku's face. This time, faster. But once again, Jaku barely dodged out of the slash, using his sword to gently push the sword out of his way. With each slash, his opponent got more and more serious, until he was putting all of his effort on each swing. Sweat started to pour down his face, yet he was still unable to get a single hit in. At that point, Jaku's opponent finally realized what was happening. His eyes widened, full of disbelief that a demi-human could move with such speed. Before he could even say anything, Jaku finally performed a single slash, cutting his opponent in the waist. Meanwhile, on the other side of the tournament, everyone's eyes were glued onto the current fight between two top swordsmen. On one side was a green-haired youth, wielding a greatsword in his hands. His face was confident and cocky, as if he knew this was an easy win. Opposite him was an older, but stronger man, wielding a smaller sword with both hands. The people around them held their breaths in anticipation. This was a fight between the first seed, Mauricio Aubert, and the second seed. As soon as the two first clashed their swords, people already knew the outcome of the battle. As expected of Mauricio, his speed of swordplay is just on another level. The gap between them is too big. Is this really a fight between the first and second seed? Mauricio was supposed to fight with Pietro Mizal, but he was unexpectedly knocked out in the first round. Everyone suddenly turned towards him. What? Who? It's a guy called Jaku? But look at the tournament list. He's fighting against the 9th and 10th seed at the same time. Luck won't save him now. It didn't take long before the fight between Mauricio and his opponent reached a climax. A human-like diva, with multiple arms wielding different kinds of swords, appeared above Mauricio. It was moving, flashing its arms with such speed that it would seem like the image was blurry. I've really missed Pietro, Mauricio said. He was really the only one who could challenge me. You're just easy. Mauricio raised his sword and performed a simple slash. But just at that moment, the diva above his head suddenly began to shuffle its arms around, swinging its different swords around. Instead of looking at Mauricio's swing, his opponent looked up at the diva above him. He was watching intently at the arms, waiting to see which one of the swords it would end up on. And finally, at the very last moment when Mauricio's sword was about to hit his opponent's chest, his diva finally chose a sword to brandish. A short sword, the other people around them claimed. Mauricio's slash is going to be extremely fast but with incredibly short reach. Reality itself seemed to have changed as Mauricio's giant greatsword suddenly shortened itself by multiple times in the span of an instant. But on the other hand, Mauricio's swing suddenly gained even more momentum and speed. He changed his swing from an overhead arc to a simple lunge aimed at his opponent's heart. The number 2 seed tried to block, but the change happened too fast. He was already prepared to counter an attack from a greatsword, with his feet set wide to get the most stable stance possible. But this led him to be extremely vulnerable up close, perfect for a weapon like the short sword. An instant later, Mauricio's sword pierced straight through his opponent's stomach. Once the attack hit, Mauricio's weapon turned back into the giant greatsword that it originally was, dealing a much greater damage than if it had been a short sword. His opponent fell to the ground, unconscious and bleeding out. The werewolf judge immediately signaled for the fight to be over before giving first aid to the swordsman who lost. Everyone watching this was in complete awe at Mauricio's power. That was his ability. That was the reason why he was considered as one of the best talents of the younger generation. From the perspective of other people, Mauricio seemed like he performed a simple slash. But from his opponent's perspective, the slash seemed to change multiple times, going from a short sword, a great sword, a scimitar, and others until finally settling in with the final weapon at the very last moment, giving them no time to adjust. Wow! And he's just at the second stage of body formation. How strong is he going to get in the future? The Aubert Company has a good future. That's why even the Draconians want to be the Aubert's allies. People started to move closer to Mauricio, wanting to become his friend after that performance. The tournament was basically over. With such an easy victory over the second seed, there was no doubt in anyone's mind that Mauricio would win. Even the brown-blood werewolves started to approach Mauricio. He was already the winner in their minds. But a couple of seconds later, a female werewolf suddenly howled and took everyone's attention. "Awoo! Disperse! The final rounds of the fight will soon begin," she declared. The other swordsmen started to complain after hearing that. Mauricio already won. There's no need to go through this tournament. I'm supposed to fight in the next round, but I'll surrender now. The other werewolves also approached her. "What are you doing? It's still not over," she said. "We still have someone here who can fight Mauricio." She then pointed in the distance, seemingly at nowhere. The female werewolf stomped her feet when she realized that Jaku was already sleeping on the ground, being covered by thick grasses. She charged towards him. "Wake up! What? The tournament is not over. You still have to go to the final round." "Fine. Where are they?" he groaned. "Surely I'll only be fighting the first seed, right?" The female werewolf shook her head. "Yes, you'll be fighting Mauricio, but you'll also need to defeat 3 other swordsmen. At the same time again." Jaku looked at her, disappointment in his face. "Don't tell me. They're all in a different location?" "Yes." "No. So inconvenient." Mauricio Aubert took in all the praise and laudations that everyone gave him. Everyone said that they were all amazed at his skills, but that was to be expected. There was no one here who could stand a chance against him from the start. And according to his brother Sergio, this whole tournament was basically just a formality. The Auberts and the Brownbloods were already well on their way to becoming an ally, and all he had to do was show off his talents in a tournament. "It's still not over," a female werewolf said. "We still have someone here who can fight Mauricio." Everyone thought she was joking, but soon after, she came and retrieved a demi-human in the distance. Jaku has moved on to the final round and has the right to battle for the championship, she declared. Everyone was confused. They didn't even recognize Jaku. They didn't see him at all during the seeding test. Jaku, he's at the last seed? How did he even reach the final round? I haven't even seen him at all. Are we sure he really got to the final round? Eventually, someone finally recognized the name. Wait, isn't Jaku the name of the guy who defeated Pietro? As soon as Pietro's name was mentioned, Mauricio finally took notice of the blue-scaled dragonborn. He defeated Pietro? He asked, laughing. Is that even possible? He's a demi-human. No one could believe that a second-stage body formation magnetic like Pietro would lose to a mere demi-human, someone who didn't have any ability power. There's no way he defeated Pietro. He's the one that's been sleeping all this time. Mauricio seemed to have remembered seeing someone laying down on the grass all the time. Werewolves, if I am correct, since he is at the last seed, he has to defeat 3 other swordsmen aside from me to win the entire tournament, right? The brown-blood werewolves nodded. He has to defeat 4 swordsmen in the span of 2 furs. This would give Jaku just 4 minutes to defeat all of them, including Mauricio. After that announcement, everyone realized that Jaku virtually had no chance to win. Just fighting Mauricio alone would take all the time allotted for him. Then I don't need to worry at all then. Just tell me when you're ready to crown me as the best swordsman in the tournament, Mauricio said, turning his attention away. He wouldn't even dare fight me. Jaku looked at the massive distance between the different arenas. It was overwhelming. Fighting 4 swordsmen in quick succession. That was the easy part. Now fighting against his own nature to be lazy, well, that was almost impossible. But in order to win, in order to bring victory to Michael and the Reborn Company, Jaku had to overcome his laziness and lock in. So should he? Jaku knew that the only way that he could win was if he stopped being lazy. He had to suppress that desire of his to sleep through this arduous ordeal and let the time pass in his dreams. By letting go of his desire for just a moment, for just this tournament, he would bring victory to himself, Michael, and the whole of the Reborn Company. He had no care for what other people thought of him. He was too lazy to do that. However, he could see in the eyes of everyone in the tournament that it wasn't just him they were underestimating. It was the Reborn Company as well, and by extension, Michael. Jaku wouldn't have to fight 4 opponents at the same time if his company had other swordsmen to spare. Does anyone even know who they are? It says here they're called the Reborn Company. Never heard of them. If they don't even have a single magnetic swordsman, then they must be a small, low-time company. All they have is a demi-human. Jaku couldn't let them think that. Not when he knew that his boss was the greatest person to ever be in his and everyone's life. I'll stop being lazy. I'll stop being myself for this tournament. That was a small sacrifice for everything that Michael did for him and his siblings. Jaku started to stand up. He was going to stop being lazy. Just as he was undergoing this switch, there was a subtle difference happening in his body. If Michael was here and he saw Jaku's heart, then he would see that the fire in his Godforge pieces were starting to dim. Jaku's ability power, which was on the verge of awakening, was slowly receding back into its dormant state. Even that strange power, one that was located near his throat, was slowly losing its power as the threads in Jaku's Godforge pieces started to unravel and retreat. Somehow, if he continued down this route of thinking, he was on course to delay his awakening. But he didn't know. Jaku stood up and began walking towards Mauricio. His hand was on the hilt of his sword, what could only be described as a declaration for a duel. Oh? Finally decided to straighten yourself up. Have you? Mauricio asked, his great sword hanging on his shoulder. The crowd parted, letting Jaku and Mauricio have the arena all to themselves. One of the werewolf judges took out a single strand of fur, lighting it up with a snap. This signaled the official start of their fight. Jaku uncharacteristically unsheathed his sword first and swung it towards Mauricio, his scales buzzing with electricity. But strangely, no blue lightning arced across his body. Mauricio let down his great sword with a thud on the ground, casually blocking Jaku's attack. Then he kicked his own greatsword, breaking Jaku's stance and making him retreat a few steps. Jaku bit his lips and charged forwards, forcing himself to move faster than he had ever been before. His body soon began to blur as he unleashed a multitude of slashes aimed towards Mauricio's weak point. Finally, blue lightning emanated out of his scales. Mauricio's face changed. His posture became one full of guard. Even the spectators around them couldn't help but gasp at the natural speed that Jaku showed them. He was even faster than Mauricio. This was unexpected coming from a demi-human. They finally understood that Jaku didn't get here through pure luck. His insane speed is what allowed him to defeat the other swordsmen and reach the final round. Meanwhile, Jaku was deaf to all the surprise around him. He kept on swinging his sword, hoping that his speed could break through Mauricio's defense. But Mauricio skillfully maneuvered his greatsword to block any of his attacks. Even though Jaku was faster than Mauricio, a big blade like his allowed for a much greater degree of freedom for blocking. And after a few seconds from the initial shock, people realized that nothing was happening. Jaku couldn't break through Mauricio's defense. Mauricio smiled. "I was a little bit shocked that you were fast. But you just have a little speed, that's all. You don't even have a proper stance." Then, Mauricio finally picked up his greatsword in one hand and timed his swing perfectly. He redirected Jaku's sword and locked it in with his, before eventually pushing him back all the way to the end of the arena. Jaku was outclassed. While the crowd were starting to feel as if Mauricio's victory was all but confirmed, there was someone in the crowd who thought differently. A bald, elderly woman with a hunched back, with a cloth wrapped around her eyes and ears, smiled as she looked at Jaku. She was dressed simply, with nothing but a yellow robe that was loose around her body, allowing for versatility in her movements. Just then, one of the fully armored younger women next to her gently grabbed onto her hands. "Sword mistress, we should leave. We have confirmed Mauricio's talent in the sword. There's nothing else to see here." The bald woman didn't speak and simply pointed at Jaku, who was just standing up and recovering after Mauricio's recent counterattack. "Him?" her attendant asked. "He's fast, I'll give him that. But his skill in the sword is quite average compared to Mauricio. His movements are in disarray, with no complexity or harmony at all. Whoever taught him must not be a decent swordsman." The attendant couldn't understand why she of all people would be interested in the demi-human. But her sword mistress seemed to disagree. The old woman shook her head. This confused the attendant. "What do you mean?" "No one taught him yet," the old woman said. "What you're seeing right there is pure, unfiltered talent. It's an unpolished stone buried underground." Her attendant took a good look at Jaku again, but still couldn't see the talent that the sword mistress was talking about. "This is not his natural state," the old woman explained. Somehow, even though her eyes were fully covered with a cloth, she could see everything much more clearly than others. The sword feels chaotic simply because its wielder is in a state of confusion. He's doing something he's not used to. He is betraying his own nature, causing such a disharmonized state in his swings. Finally, the attendant understood. It would be like using a sword with your foot. Certainly, someone could become competent in sword fighting using the lower limbs, but that is not where the sword could display its full potential. "Then my original assessment of him was correct, sword mistress. He is not worthy of our time," the attendant said. "If he continues in a state of contrast with his own nature, then his talent will be lost, whatever it may be." The old woman stayed silent before she eventually turned around and left with her attendants. But even as they exited the werewolf forest, the attendant still couldn't get Jaku off her mind. "I still can't believe that demi-human sword talent was good enough to impress even that of the sword mistress." At that moment, the old lady stopped in her tracks. "He was a demi-human?" she asked in complete shock. Her attendants had never seen their sword mistress so shocked. They thought she already knew that. "Yes, sword mistress. He was a demi-human, not a human or a beast folk." The old lady took a second to process that information before she eventually started smiling. "Ha ha ha ha. Forgive me for being blind and deaf. It should have been obvious, given the cloth that wrapped around the old lady's eyes and ears. But her attendants had been so used to their swords mistress seeing things much better than others that they completely forgot that she was even disabled. I really thought he was human because of that thing in his chest. It seems that there's more to him that meets the eye, the old woman said. Her attendants looked at each other, confused. Saw what in his chest, sword mistress? It's nothing, the old lady replied. It's a shame. It seems that fate already has something in store for that unpolished stone. If not, I would have liked to take him in as my student. As soon as she said that, her attendants suddenly went into a complete uproar. What? There will be a riot if people find out that a nobody became your student. Sword mistress, you cannot be serious. The old lady simply chuckled seeing her attendants act this way. Maybe, maybe not. We'll see. I'll let the strings of fate work her magic. Jaku stood up again, his face indignant, before he charged towards Mauricio again and kept on barraging him with ultra-fast moves. The two kept exchanging clashes, with Jaku on the offensive and Mauricio on the defensive. Many thought this would be an easy win for Mauricio, but as the seconds passed by and the fur burned in the werewolf judge's hands, people noticed that the two were on equal footing. This was surprising. Mauricio noticed it too. The only time that he could hit Jaku was if he countered one of his wild attacks that seemed to have no rhyme or reason. However, when he attacked Jaku, forcing Jaku on the defensive, the demi-human seemed to suddenly become an impenetrable fortress. It was weird. On the offensive, Jaku's speed made his moves chaotic and unorganized, making him look like an amateur. But on the defensive, his speed complemented perfectly when trying to evade or block attacks. His moves were efficient and confident, as if he was a master. Did his teacher only train him in defensive moves? Mauricio wondered. Despite this obvious flaw, Mauricio still couldn't get the finishing blow on Jaku. The two were evenly matched. The worst part was that the other people were beginning to notice this as well. Why isn't he defeating Jaku? Does he want to let the time run out? Or maybe he can't. Gritting his teeth, Mauricio decided to establish his dominance over Jaku. I'm getting tired of you, he said to Jaku. I'll show you why demi-humans can never become the best swordsmen. A powerful shockwave emanated out of Mauricio as he began to tap into a power hidden deep inside his chest. Threads of ability power unleashed out of his God-forged pieces, allowing the diva above his head to manifest. A human-like figure with a black hood that obscured half his face appeared above Mauricio. It had about 10 arms in total going around his body and even on the back of his neck. Each of its arms held different swords, some small, some thin, and some curved. However, its 10th arm was still manifested only up to its wrist, showing that more arms would develop as he cultivated to the upper stages of the body formation stage. Once the diva had shown itself, the gap between the two swordsmen immediately became as wide as a chasm. Jaku found himself unable to move forwards. His instincts told him that this was someone he could not yet defeat. It was no longer a battle between swordsmen. It was a battle between magnetics. And as of right now, Jaku had no connection to his God-forged pieces. Mauricio raised his greatsword and swung it towards Jaku, its speed not faster or slower than his swing from before. But now, the diva above his head shuffled its hands around, becoming a blur. Jaku took a step back and positioned his katana diagonally, intending to deflect the greatsword just enough for him to evade. But just as Mauricio's blade was about to clash with his katana, Mauricio's diva finally decided upon its weapon. It stopped moving, showing a single weapon in all of its arms. A rapier. The greatsword in Mauricio's hands suddenly started to shift and morph into an entirely different weapon, becoming thinner and lighter than its original properties. Jaku's defensive move was proven moot. Mauricio changed his moves at the very last instant, easily bypassing Jaku's katana and straight into his chest. The weapon was about to pierce Jaku's scales, but an invisible prismatic shield appeared and clashed with the tip of the rapier, causing a miniature explosion that knocked Mauricio a step back, and Jaku flying off into the crowd. Wow! As expected of Mauricio. His ability is truly overpowered. How can anyone counter that? Even Jaku's insane speed can't keep up with the reality-altering speed of Mauricio's ability. But while everyone was praising Mauricio, thinking he'd already won, the man himself was staring at his weapon, surprised. It was now a greatsword again, but now there was a single scratch on the tip. Somehow, his mithril relic weapon was damaged just from that attack. Yet, when he looked back at Jaku, he was still uninjured. Hurt, but not bleeding. Mauricio couldn't understand how that was even possible. His attack was laced with ability power. No metal or magic should stand a chance against it. "There's something wrong with you," he grumbled to Jaku. And with much more ferocity than before, he charged at Jaku and began to barrage him with unrelenting attack after attack. With each swing, his weapon changed its shape, speed, and size randomly, giving Jaku no chance at all to dodge. Jaku got battered constantly, with his only saving grace being the prismatic shield that protected him from harm. But even that won't last forever. Mauricio's weapon turned back into a greatsword as he swung it down towards Jaku's chest, finally breaking through the lesser unity defense. It shattered like glass, its pieces flowing in the wind. Jaku crashed on his back, blood spewing out of his mouth. He was on the verge of losing. This is why the Aubert Company will prevail in New Sparta. We have discipline and prioritize order over anything else, unlike other companies. Lazy people will never succeed, Mauricio declared. Suddenly, Jaku raised his head and remembered something. Even though he'd been lazy all this time, never once did Michael reprimand him or try to change who he was. Michael always wanted them to be comfortable. That was his goal. That was what he wanted everyone to be. That was what he always told him and everyone in the nation of Reborn. And if he lost to Mauricio, then this meant that Michael was wrong. And that was impossible. Their boss wasn't wrong. Jaku realized what he had to do. If he can't win by being lazy, then he'll win by being lazy. It was as if a switch had been flipped in Jaku's head. If the world wouldn't permit him to be lazy, then he'll change the world itself. That's how Michael would have done it. He couldn't help but laugh at himself for not realizing it sooner. "What are you laughing at?" Mauricio asked, pausing mid-swing. "I've been doing it all wrong," Jaku said. "I don't know why I was trying to change myself. I'm lazy. I'm always going to be lazy." Mauricio scoffed at him. "And that's what made you lose." But Jaku shook his head. "No, it's what will allow me to win." One could only laugh at Jaku's words, seeing as how he looked like he was on the brink of defeat. Just then, Jaku changed his posture. His previously straight and taut stance was now loosened, becoming a little bit slouched. He was in his most natural state. He put his katana on his shoulders and almost leaned on one foot. This was a stance that any sword teacher would hate. It was full of holes, it had a lot of vulnerability, and most of all, it was lazy. Yet Mauricio frowned as he saw this. There was a change happening right in front of his very eyes. He didn't know what it was, but he knew that something wrong was happening. And if he could see ability power just as well as Michael, he would see that his intuition was right. There was a change happening in Jaku's body. His heart, which had cooled down due to recent events, was now starting to glow and warm even more than before. The Godforge pieces in his chest were becoming more and more active, pumping faster and faster until strands began to form from it which slowly slithered their way towards Jaku's hands. An invisible force began to emanate from Jaku. Mauricio was the first one to notice. His diva twitched, feeling the presence of another slowly starting to form. Impossible! A figure started shimmering in and out of existence above Jaku's head until eventually, his diva was finally able to manifest itself. It was a giant egg, dark blue color, with multiple lightning streaks going around its surface. What is that? That's a diva. There's no way. He's a demi-human. People in the crowd began gasping and shouting at seeing a diva manifest above Jaku's head. They felt like they were dreaming. Jaku was a demi-human, not a human who could have Godforge pieces in their heart, or a beastfolk who had a Dao heart in their chests. Yet, the invisible power emanating from that giant egg above Jaku's head proved its existence to be the same one as other magnetics. the same one as the one above Mauricio's head. Right now, they saw a miracle. Mauricio's hair stood on end as he saw this. He knew that there was something going on with Jaku, and as it turned out, he was right. Jaku was a freak of nature, one who denied the very limitations of his species. "Monster freak!" Mauricio shouted. Fear started to creep into his heart of the implications this had for Jaku. If he had a diva, then this meant that he had an ability power. And with ability power, his base speed, by very definition, exceeds that of what reality could consider normal. And this scared Mauricio. Before he realized something. "I knew I should have defeated you before. But it doesn't matter. I don't know how you got a diva, but at the very least, you're still in the first stage. I eat those for breakfast." Mauricio raised his greatsword above his head and charged towards Jaku, the diva above his head shuffling its swords into a blur. Despite this obvious anomaly, Mauricio was right. There was still a one-stage difference between the two. Coupled with experience, Mauricio should come out on top in a battle between their two abilities when they clashed against each other. But instead of worrying about it, Jaku did the unthinkable. He closed his eyes and tilted his head back, as if he had fallen asleep. Correction, not as if. He really did fall asleep. Up close, Mauricio realized that Jaku's eyes were actually closed. He didn't know why Jaku did that, but this was the best opportunity he was going to get. He swung his greatsword from above his head, imbuing it with more power than ever. And even as he was mid-swing, Jaku's eyelids were still closed. An instant later, Mauricio's diva finally stopped shuffling its arms. His weapon now became a simple sword, one completely versatile, having both speed and power. It matched perfectly with Jaku's katana. But Jaku was still asleep. Even if he awoke now, he would have no chance of reacting to Mauricio's swing, especially if it was just an instant away from hitting. Right at the very last moment, the dark blue egg above Jaku's head started to twitch, before a single crack spread from top to bottom. Suddenly, lightning began to arc around Jaku's body. It was instant. Light speed. Jaku opened his eyes and saw everything in the world slow down to a stop. Mauricio's weapon, which had just finished its transformation from a greatsword to a sword, was right in front of him, seemingly stopped in time. An overwhelming feeling of annoyance welled up in Jaku's heart. I gotta deal with this? He just wanted to sleep more. However, the sword in front of him was currently in the way of that. His dreams were calling him with such intensity that more lightning arced around his body and his eyes, as if the world itself was giving him light speed in order to deal with whatever situation he was currently in. Jaku moved his katana from his shoulders, with lightning streaking behind it like a comet's tail. Then, he sliced in front of him with the most casual of swings. A few moments later, a large amount of red stained Mauricio's armor and clothes from his chest to his stomach. Then, the world blurred back into its normal speed. Mauricio finished his swing, his sword striking nothing but the ground. Wah! He couldn't even wonder how Jaku suddenly disappeared from his vision from one instant to the next because he suddenly felt a pain in his body. He looked down only to see blood dripping out of his chest. His body armor had a clean cut from his left shoulder to his right torso. Even the other people around him couldn't understand what happened. It was as if they missed a huge chunk of time. How did he end up there? People only realized that Jaku had somehow appeared on the other side of the arena, a couple of meters from where he was supposed to be hit, and was now laying down on the ground, sleeping. People thought they were going crazy. They didn't know what happened. But for Jaku, everything happened just like normal. This was his ability power. Sleep became his source of energy. Any time that his sleep or his relaxation time got disturbed, an enormous amount of light speed would get imbued into his body so that he could fix his problem and go back to sleep. I'm injured, Mauricio muttered in disbelief. His head started to spin as he saw his own blood dripping into the ground. How could he bleed? He could only see a blur of movement when Jaku disappeared from his sight. His instincts tried to move, but the blade was far too fast for him to even react to. This only meant one thing. Jaku was far faster than even his own diva. This was someone who just awakened. Mauricio didn't want to believe it. He ignored the pain in his chest and rushed towards Jakku, his great sword dragging across the ground. He swung his weapon down on Jakku, who was laying on his side, yawning. The weapons in Mauricio's diva began shuffling, before turning into its final form as a two-handed longsword, meant to cleave anything in half. But as soon as the sword reached an inch above Jakku's head, a very annoyed clicking of the tongue resounded out in the arena. TSK. Jakku's entire body began to be engulfed in lightning, his speed now beyond anything possible in normal reality. In a single instant, Mauricio found himself groaning as he got another cut in his back. Grah! He stumbled forwards before looking around, confused as to where Jakku even went off to. Behind him, he saw Jakku laying face up on the ground, his hands behind his head with a comfortable smile on his face. This annoyed Mauricio to no end. Jakku looked extremely vulnerable, something that his teachers and masters always told him to avoid. Discipline and hard work was what allowed him to be praised as one of the best talents in his generation. Yet, he bled because of him, a demi-human who was the complete antithesis of what it meant to be a swordsman. The worst part was that Mauricio was starting to feel dread as he looked at Jakku. As vulnerable as he may seem, the two deep cuts on his body already proved that fighting Jakku was a fruitless endeavor. And he wasn't the only one who was noticing this. Oh my God! Jakku is winning. I can't believe it. A demi-human is beating Mauricio Aubert. Not just any demi-human, but a one-of-a-kind. I think he's the only one in history with a diva. The praises that were supposed to be for Mauricio were now directed at Jakku. Mauricio couldn't accept that. He wasn't supposed to lose. He then looked at the crowd observing their fight. What are you all doing? You. He pointed at the three swordsmen who were supposed to fight Jakku. Why aren't you fighting him? Jakku was supposed to fight 4 swordsmen, including Mauricio, in quick succession under an extreme time limit. Nobody even thought he had to fight the other 3 because they thought he wouldn't get past Mauricio. But now, that possibility was not just more than likely. It was inevitable. That's not part of the rules, one of the swordsmen said. But Mauricio didn't care. He couldn't lose this fight. You fight him, or you'll have the entirety of the Aubert Company hunting you down, he threatened. That seemed to have been enough of a motivation for the other 3. Having the Auberts as their enemies was almost a death sentence. Not only that, but they'd have to fight Jakku eventually. They'd seen his speed and knew that the only way they could stand a change against him was if they pooled their strengths. They approached Jakku from all sides, holding their swords close to their chest. It was now 4 against 1. Even Jakku's speed wouldn't be able to overcome such an inequality. Or so they thought. Jakku, faced with this disadvantage, could only smile and express his gratitude. Thanks. That really saves me the trouble of hunting you all down. Mauricio and the other 3 swordsmen charged towards Jakku, each one activating their ability powers. 3 more divas manifested in the arena. 1 black cheetah, the other a horse, and the last a shooting star. It just so happened that the 3 swordsmen's ability power were specialized in speed. If there was anyone who could stand a chance against Jakku, then it would be them. Their speeds increased multiple-fold as their swords swung through the air, heading towards Jakku's body. But just like before, Jakku awoke groggily from the disturbance, with pure irritation powering the lightning arcs that coursed through his scales. He disappeared from their sights, escaping out of their enclosure. One of the swordsmen activated his cheetah diva, allowing his footsteps to have maximum speed and maximum versatility. He shuffled his stances, turning around just in time as Jakku was about to slash at him. Their swords clinked as the swordsman blocked the first attack. But he was completely helpless against the 20 other moves Jakku performed in the instant after the block. The swordsman fell to his knees, his body filled with cuts. Jakku, done with his first opponent, turned around and rushed out into the edges of the arena to take a nap. But the 2 other swordsmen were hot on his tail. The one with the horse diva lunged at Jakku from behind, becoming a giant lance that could pierce through anything. Meanwhile, the one with the shooting star diva teleported in front of Jakku, positioning his sword for Jaku to walk right into. This would have been a checkmate for any other person. But what they didn't know was that Jaku's ability power was only strengthened by his annoyance, by his need to become lazy. The fact that they were in the way of his relaxation only served to empower the lightning arcs on his body. The whole world turned into slow motion for Jaku as he stepped to the side, dodging the sword in front of him. Then, he let the two do the work for them. With Jaku gone at light speed, the two swordsmen couldn't stop themselves in time and clashed, injuring each other with their swords. In just a matter of a few seconds, Jaku severely injured the three swordsmen. And it was only this time that Mauricio attacked Jaku from behind. With such perfect timing, he thought he could get Jaku off guard. But he was dead wrong. Lightning arced through Jaku's scale as he lunged his katana forwards. Mauricio stopped mid-swing, his shoulder becoming stained with blood. The grip he had on his greatsword faltered, letting it fall on the ground. With such an injury, Mauricio had no hopes left to win. He fell on the ground, bleeding. "No, I can't lose," he grumbled. In such a desperate situation, he could only swallow his pride. Mauricio looked at the werewolf judge on the edge of their arena. He was holding onto a single strand of fur, which was just moments away from completely burning. As long as any of them survived long enough, Jaku would be eliminated from the competition. "Run!" he shouted to the other swordsmen. They knew exactly what he was talking about. Without a moment's hesitation, they used the last of their strengths to activate their ability powers and run in opposite directions. They just needed a second, and they could escape just in time. But right at that moment, Jaku muttered a single word. "Stop!" And the ground underneath their feet shook. Even with Jaku's insane quickness, he would not be able to catch all three of them in just a matter of a few seconds, especially since their ability powers specialized in speed. Not only that, but the way that Jaku's ability power worked was that his light speed only activated when someone woke him up from his nap. It wouldn't work if he was the one who tried to attack others instead. Intentionally or not, this was the best way they could have tried to defeat Jaku. Yet something else happened. Just as the three swordsmen were about to run for kilometers on end in just a few seconds, they suddenly felt a prick in their hearts. It was as if someone was grabbing it and holding it with such force that it stopped beating for a few moments. And suddenly, the divas above their heads suddenly began to quiver and shift. The speed that was supposed to overcome their entire body was nowhere to be found. They became as slow as a normal human. With such an unexpected turn, the three swordsmen found themselves stumbling forwards before crashing on the ground. Wah! They looked up above them and saw their divas disappearing like smoke. It was gone, unmanifested, out of their control. And if Michael could see the sight, he would see that threads of ability power that were supposed to cover their bodies and imbue it with speed were suddenly cut from its source as if a sword had sliced through it. No one knew what happened. It was only after a second had passed did the feeling of heavy air finally pass. The swordsmen felt their God-forged pieces finally breathe again, as if it had been let go from someone's grasp. When they tried to remanifest their divas again, they were too late. Jaku had cut each of them in the back, just a hair's width away from turning fatal. As for Mauricio, he was at such a loss for words that his previous injuries finally caught up to him, causing him to lose consciousness from the extreme blood loss. With all four unable to fight, the fight had ended. And half a second later, the final wisp of werewolf fur had burned completely. Jaku did it. He won the tournament at the literal very last moment. But there was no celebration. There was only silence. Everyone was still confused, their jaws unable to shut from pure shock and bewilderment. They had too many questions unanswered. The swordsmen should have been able to run away from Jaku in time. So why didn't they? What was that strange heavy feeling that lasted for only a second? How did Jaku awaken an incredibly powerful diva despite being a demi-human? It wasn't until the female werewolf rushed by Jaku's side and announced his victory did they finally wake up from their stupor. "We have a victor," she declared, holding his hand upwards. "The Brownbloods will fully support and cooperate with Jaku and the Reborn Company." It took a couple of seconds before the crowd started to clap. It started from 1, to a few, and eventually a roaring applause that celebrated Jaku's unexpected comeback and triumph against the supposed best swordsman prodigy of the younger generation. Jaku, on the other hand, didn't care for the praise and laudations directed at him. All he wanted to do was lie down and sleep. But there was something bothering him. What was that? He asked himself, massaging his throat. Meanwhile, back at the Draconian Towers, Sergio Aubert continued to express his utmost confidence in his little brother. Chief Lupin, please send in a werewolf to check in on the tournament. My brother has probably won by now, he said. The giant brown wolf nodded. I've already sent for a messenger. He will return shortly. That's great, said Sergio. Zoviru, you wouldn't mind me taking the antique now, would you? Soon, Chief Lupin's messenger will arrive and give us the good news. Chief Klaus couldn't help but scoff at his words. But he couldn't say anything else either. Even he thought Mauricio would win. But just at that moment, Michael suddenly felt warmth come out of his Godforge pieces. It was overflowing with ability power. Congratulations. Jaku has successfully awakened his diva. You have received an excess of ability power. Such a huge change in Michael's body would surely have been noticed by the others if he let it continue emanating out of his chest. Thankfully, he had a battery ready for such occasions. He put it on his chest, which immediately began to siphon off any excess energy that came from Jaku's awakening. It wasn't long before the charge percentage went up. 7%, 12%, 20%. It reached a whopping 20%. Michael couldn't believe it. When Fudge and Shiina awakened, the excess energy barely got him up to 15%. But now it was able to reach 20. Did something happen? Either way, he wasn't complaining. 20% would be enough for a single execution of the quantum step, now that he was in the 6th stage of body formation. He felt a little bit more secure surrounded by these powerful chiefs and draconians with this battery on his chest. Then finally, the good news came. They all turned their heads as a brown wolf came to a stop right in front of the tower, his paws skidding on the stone block floors. Then, its body began to morph and change into something smaller, before eventually turning back into a human. The werewolf then walked over towards Chief Lupin and howled. Awoo! I have come to announce the results of the tournament. Chief. Sergio immediately stepped forward. Come on, don't be shy. Just tell us so that I can finally get my hands on this antique. Mauricio won, right? The werewolf paused for a second before replying. Mauricio. Lost, sir. Sergio stopped in his tracks, just moments away from touching the antique. Say what now? Mauricio lost in the final round, repeated the werewolf. He was defeated in battle and is currently being treated for severe blood loss. Just as Sergio's face turned completely ashen, a certain giant scarred gray wolf suddenly began howling and laughing. Awoha, awoha, awoha. You spoke too soon, Aubert. Looks like Mauricio is not as talented as you said. He lost. Sergio ignored Chief Klaus' insults. My brother lost? That's impossible. Even Chief Lupin was skeptical. Are you certain? Was it a close fight? The werewolf messenger shook his head. No, it wasn't, Chief. His opponent was uninjured. Ha 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 ha. What a wonderful turn of events. I do say I quite enjoy that look on your faces. Zoviru laughed. But a promise is a promise, young man. Professor, catch? Zoviru tossed the giant white tibia bone to the professor, completely overwhelming the man. But despite having such a heavy bone as tall as a human fall on his chest, the professor couldn't be more happy. The antique is mine. It's finally mine, he exclaimed. While everyone was shocked at such an outcome, Michael fully expected this from the beginning. I gotta go get Jaku out of there. He's probably dying to go to bed. While the professor was celebrating this huge win, Sergio Aubert was still in complete denial. The antique isn't yours yet, Professor, Sergio interjected. I won't believe anyone's words until I see my little brother myself. If I find out it's a lie, I will take what is rightfully mine. This was obviously a slight on the brown blood werewolves since he was accusing them of lying. The giant brown wolf snarled at Sergio. Watch your words carefully, boy. If it weren't for your father, I would have already lunged at your throat, warned Chief Lupin. But this antique is a matter of great importance. It's not that I do not trust your werewolves, Chief Lupin. It is that I simply want to do my due diligence. My father would be remiss if I simply believe the words of others instead of looking for it myself, argued Sergio. However, Chief Lupin was still disgruntled about it. Seeing as they still needed a bit of convincing, Sergio decided to add a little bit more of an incentive to the two werewolf tribes. Chief Lupin, Chief Klaus, the Aubert Company would be willing to give you a steady supply of moonstone, Sergio said. The two werewolf chiefs turned their heads in Sergio's direction, their eyes widening. Moonstone? They both asked. The two werewolf chiefs shared a brief look before their gazes pulled away from each other. I know how precious moonstone is for werewolves, especially you blood brothers. It's what caused your rift into two tribes. Is it not? The giant gray wolf snarled. That's not the only reason, but you are right. Moonstone is precious for our species as a whole. A steady supply will give my tribe the edge over others. Meanwhile, the professor anxiously bit his lips and tightened his grip on the giant bone. This is bad, he muttered. Michael leaned into the professor, asking for clarity. What's a moonstone, Professor? It's going to give me a heart attack. That's what. Moonstone is what allows werewolves to safely transform even without the full moon. They will lose their sanity if they tapped into their wolf form without it, Professor Lichtenstein explained. The importance of moonstone for werewolves couldn't be more overstated. Their species could easily contend with the draconians for the most dominant species in the world if they could transform anytime they wanted. The fact that they could only do it on select days of the year meant that their overall strength was greatly diminished in the grand scheme of things. Other species could just easily look out their window during the night and see if it was safe to attack the werewolves. If it was a full moon, they would hide away. If the moon was gone, they'd know the werewolves were weak. Moonstone was the solution for this. It was a powder that, when made into incense and inhaled, would give a calming sensation for the werewolves and make them think that they were in the presence of the moon itself. As you can guess, all werewolf tribes yearn to have moonstone. But the inherent rarity of the plant makes it extremely hard to procure. Plant? Michael pondered. We all know moonstone is rare, said Sergio. But it is not impossible to get. Our immense reach and connections will allow us to get it some way or another. We will have adventurers scouring dangerous mountainsides every day of the week. That you can be sure of. Chief Klaus then sauntered over towards Sergio, his immense size and ferality oozing intimidation. You dare propose to break a promise under the full moon? Chief Klaus asked, almost laughing. Foolish. If you wish to exchange your life for the antique, then do so as you please. Sergio tried to utter out words, but stuttered under the giant gray wolf's gaze. They could. After a few seconds to compose himself, Sergio could finally make a proposal. The winner, he shouted. The antique shall still go to the most talented. If Mauricio did lose, as the brown-blood werewolves say, then I will recruit the one who defeated him. Once an Aubert, he, and by extension, us, will be entitled to the antique. Zoviru suddenly started laughing. Ha 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 ha. How interesting. Very well. If you can somehow pull that off, then I'd be willing to give you the antique. Sergio stood proud. The Auberts can offer him something that no one else can. We can give him the promise of success in the global stage. It won't be long until we reach conglomerate status once again. He didn't wait any longer and whistled with his hands, and a few seconds later, a horse started trotting in his directions. I shall return shortly. In the meantime, Professor, I suggest that you should take this time to study the antique. You're going to have to wait for a year after we get it. Then he rode off into the distance. The professor then immediately got up off his feet and began to drag the antique an inch at a time. Come on, Kyo, urged the professor. We got to get this back to my lab. I have a lot of questions for this beauty, but not a lot of time. However, Kyo didn't move. In fact, he seemed to be heading in the opposite direction, towards where Sergio rode off to. What are you doing? The professor questioned him. Sorry, Professor. I've got plans. I have to retrieve someone or else they're going to get real grumpy about not having his sleep, Michael said. Ah, you also have a friend in the swordsman tournament, the professor remembered. Come join me, Professor. I can't. The Auberts are going to steal the antique from me. Michael chuckled. Don't worry, Professor. They won't, he assured. Just then, the brown-blood werewolf messenger, now transformed back into a wolf, walked right next to them. Would you like a ride back, Professor? Understandably, the professor was conflicted. He knew just how persuasive the Auberts can be, especially with the benefits they could give as a powerful company. They rivaled even that of the legacies from Metropolis. Aren't you curious as to who defeated Mauricio? He asked the professor. Well, yes, but he's probably just another talented human kid. I've seen plenty of those. But this antique. But before he could finish his sentence, the brown-blood werewolf interrupted him. Demi-human, Professor. It was a demi-human, not a human, who defeated Mauricio. The professor stood there wide-eyed. A demi-human? Not a beast folk. No, sir. A demi-human if unknown species. Numerous thoughts and calculations flashed through the professor's mind at near light speed. And each time, he could not fathom how a demi-human could defeat Mauricio, a second-stage magnetic, who was already extremely talented for his age. The only possibility he could think of was that Mauricio intended to lose, but that was highly unlikely given Sergio's boasting. Interested in seeing him now, Professor? Michael asked with a knowing smile. The professor tapped his feet for a few seconds when faced with such a dilemma. Ugh. Fine. I'll go see that demi-human. But just for a brief second. The antique awaits my appraisal. Michael chuckled as the professor kept grumbling as he boarded the giant brown wolf. He was going to board as well, when he suddenly felt a few presences approach them. His eyes immediately focused to one person. An old woman with a white cloth wrapped around her eyes. Is she blind? Michael asked himself. Using his supreme talent, he noticed that her eyes and ears were completely devoid of light mana. This meant that it wasn't alive like the rest of her body, which has light mana density rivaling even that of a youth in their prime. The fact that she was being escorted by these fully armored women holding her hand supported his guess. However, with the way she carried herself, her natural aura as a person, Michael didn't get the impression that she was someone disabled. Her steps were confident, her posture relaxed but proud. And most importantly, her gaze seemed to be of someone who could see exactly what she was trying to look at. Case in point, the old woman turned her head and made eye contact with him. She paused for a second, staring at him, before she gave him a brief smile and went on walking her way past. She was interesting, to say the least. There was definitely more to her than what meets the eye. Out of pure curiosity, he decided to subtly bring out his drone and observe the old woman using his drone vision. As soon as the interface for the camera appeared in his mind, showing as a complete 360-degree view, Michael was blinded. Ability power was surging out of the old woman's eyes, manifesting as an intense brightness as if it was the sun itself. He could see threads, sun rays, coming out of her eyes like lasers, scanning her surroundings like sonar or lidar. This was probably how she's able to move through the world blind. He then piloted the drone to just inch a little bit closer to her so that he could take a closer look. And as he did, he noticed something in her eyes. It wasn't being powered by threads that come out of her Godforge pieces. The threads of ability power were coming from her body itself, acting like veins that go from the heart to the eyes. She's beyond the body formation realm. This was extremely similar to how his quantum techniques worked. Came from his body, not to. Just how strong is she? He wondered. The fact that she was using such a powerful and energy-intensive technique so casually, without even manifesting her diva, meant that she was probably beyond the initial stages of the nascent spirit realm. Maybe even beyond it entirely. Kyo, come on. Time is ticking, the professor said urgently. He was so focused on the demi-human and the antique that he didn't notice the new arrivals until Michael pointed it out to him. The professor squinted his eyes. "What's that old hag doing here?" he asked. "Old hag? Old hag, sword-obsessed bitch, heavenly knight, whatever you want to call her," the professor grumbled. Michael finally understood why she looked so strong. No wonder. He wouldn't have guessed she was one of those way of the weapon masters because of the obvious lack of weapon anywhere on her. I wonder what she uses. He'd already met the heavenly knight for the way of the axe, the Orc Kruger, and from what he knew, there were only about 10 of them in total. "You seem familiar with her, Professor. Very friendly, I guess." "I have history with her, yes," the professor answered. "But I hate dealing with her. All she ever talks about is her swords. She's crazy. She talks to those pieces of metal as if they were actually alive. I can't deal with that. Let's go. Antique." "Wait for me," the professor said, waving at the bone which was staked on the ground beside Zoviru. "Yeah, she's crazy," Michael muttered sarcastically. Professor Lichtenstein didn't seem all that interested in telling his history with the blind woman, which was a shame. At least now he knew she was a swordsman. And as much as he wanted to find out more about this blind and deaf heavenly knight, it looked like she didn't come here for him. She came here to talk with the 3 beast folks gathered together. "Chief Klaus, Chief Lupin," the old woman greeted. Then she gave a brief nod to the Draconian. Zoviru. The Draconian with the red hair and wild eyebrows suddenly manifested a booming shockwave coming from his body. "Come to finish our little fight?" he asked Sword Mistress Eldia. "Please, I'm not that bored anymore," she replied. Then the 2 giant wolves looked at the old woman, giving her a respectful howl. "Sword Mistress Eldia," Chief Lupin said, "I didn't think you would be coming here." "Yes, well, I heard about your little tournament and I had a bit of time," the old woman replied. "It was quite the sight. I was just about to get back and check on the results of the tournament," said Chief Lupin. "It seems that I was wrong. Mauricio did not come out on top." "Ha! Serves you right," Chief Klaus chuckled. His brother ignored him. Meanwhile, the female armored attendants of Eldia could only express their shock through their eyes. Mauricio lost? That seemed highly unlikely, given the low level of competition. However, Eldia herself didn't look all too shocked at the news. "Sword Mistress, did you see who won?" Chief Lupin asked. Eldia chuckled. "No, but I can guess who won." The 2 werewolf chiefs and even Zoviru raised their eyebrows upon hearing such words from her. It seemed that whoever that was left a really good impression on the Heavenly Knight. Chief Lupin, particularly, was surprised because he thought he already adequately assessed the competitors when he saw them. None stood out except for Mauricio, but it seemed that the Sword Mistress was a Heavenly Knight for a reason. Although blind, she could see more than most when it came to swords. "I was about to check the results of the tournament, but it looks like you have something to say to me," Chief Lupin guessed. "Not just you, but all of you," Eldia replied. "It concerns that bone, and the earthquake that signaled something ancient." Meanwhile, Michael and the professor clung on to the werewolf fur tightly as he zipped around at an extremely fast speed. The professor seemed to have held on better this time around, but the fear and anxiety still remained. It wasn't long before they reached the Brown Blood tribe, seeing the tail end of a celebration. The tournament had just finished, and the werewolves and participants were in a mood to party. The professor immediately got off the giant wolf and brushed past merry men, women, and werewolf to seek the demi-human said to have beaten Mauricio. While on the way there, the professor couldn't help but give a lot of different guesses to Michael. How did they do it? Did they cheat? No, werewolves are good at spotting things under the moon. Was it a master of the sword pretending to be a beginner? No, Eldia would have spotted it immediately. How did they do it? "I thought you weren't that interested, Professor," Michael chuckled. "Shut up. What do you think?" Michael gave out an imperceptible smile. "What if they awakened an ability?" Immediately, the professor burst out laughing. "An ability? You're a funny man, Kyo. It's been tested numerous times that demi-humans cannot take Godforge pieces. There are world wars fought exactly because of how many atrocities had been done to prove that." Michael shrugged. I don't know, Professor. That just seems the only likely possibility. There has to be some other reason, the professor insisted. Would you like to bet on that, Professor? Michael asked immediately, sensing an opportunity. Sure. He smiled. That would be 2 favors you owe me if you lose this one. And we would get even if I win. If that ridiculous guess turned out to be true, then I'd be doubly in your favor. Michael smiled and let the professor keep on laughing about the insane guess he had. Eventually, they reached the werewolf judges, the one in charge of the tournament itself. Where is he? Did he really defeat Mauricio? One of the werewolf judges answered. You mean Jaku? Yeah. He did. How the hell did he do that? The professor asked. He cheated, right? The werewolves looked at each other. To tell you the truth, Professor, he used a diva. What? Told you, Michael whispered. The power coming from him was unmistakably ability power, said the werewolf. The professor's jaws dropped. Those were the only words he was never expecting. He was more than prepared to have the truth be that a spatial anomaly happened and tilted the favor into the demi-human. But him having a diva and use ability power, that was impossible. No way. There's just no way. However, the numerous first-hand accounts from everyone watching the tournament could corroborate the story. This wasn't a lie. I have to see him myself. Where's this demi-human Jaku? One of the female werewolves pointed at the distance, where there was a single pine tree in an open space, perfectly giving shade and warmth under the moonlight. And laying down with their head rested on the roots was a dark blue-scaled dragonborn having a nice and relaxing sleep. The professor squinted his eyes. He bears a similarity to the Komodo species, but also the draconians, he assessed. I've never seen his type before. Fascinating. Michael put his hands behind his back. Perhaps he's an evolved form of the Komodo demi-humans. The professor's eyes widened. That could be a possibility. How did you think of that? Michael shrugged. Come on. Let's approach him, said the professor, going into a run. But just before they reached Jaku, someone got there before them. A horse came strutting in from the distance before coming to a stop. Then, a familiar face came down from the horse and faced Jaku with a mix of pride and contentment in his face. It was Sergio Aubert. I am Sergio Aubert, Sergio introduced himself, putting an emphasis on his family name. Are you the demi-human who awakened a diva? However, he didn't garner the reaction he wanted or even expected. Jaku groggily opened his eyes, and upon seeing Sergio's face, immediately closed it back up and continued to sleep. He even had the audacity to change his sleeping position to become face away from this stranger. Sergio was flabbergasted for a second. He thought that giving his name and his family would give him a little bit of respect. Yet there was none. Hey! Sergio called out, but Jaku was deep off into sleep. Finally, Sergio had enough and bent down to forcefully wake the demi-human from sleep. And as soon as his hands got near Jaku's shoulder, blue lightning suddenly emerged out of Jaku's scales, empowering him with light speed. Above his head, the image of a giant dark blue egg with lightning streaks around it appeared. It had numerous cracks on its surface, on the brink of hatching. Then Jaku disappeared. Sergio and the professor were shocked to see such a sight. They turned their heads, only to see Jaku already sleeping peacefully on another tree in the distance. It was true. This demi-human really did awaken a diva. Not only that, but that incredible speed could only be achieved by the reality-altering quality of ability powers. Goodness me, the professor gasped, slapping his own forehead. I'm seeing an impossibility right in front of my eyes. Sergio was also flabbergasted, his eyes realizing that even his brother couldn't react to that speed. Your talent is unique, and is something that will be greatly appreciated in our company. Join the Auberts, Sergio said, approaching Jaku again. Jaku gave him an irritated look. Can't you see I'm busy here? Sergio's eyebrows twitched, not liking the disrespect given to him. However, he couldn't say anything. Jaku was a demi-human of extremely great importance, perhaps even greater than the antique itself. He was the only demi-human in the world that was a magnetic. That fact that he succeeded where no one in the world had meant that the information he could give to the Alberts would be invaluable. Sergio had to recruit him at all costs. Just then, the professor hurriedly got in front of Sergio. "No, come with me. I must know how you became a magnetic. This is for the good of the entire world. I promise that you will gain fame unlike anything you've ever seen." After the professor publishes the findings of the antique as well as this unique case of magnetism manifesting in a demi-human, then this news would surely reach the ends of the world, no doubt. Sergio then pulled the professor aside, giving Jaku his side. "The Alberts will promise to help you break through to the nascent realm." Both Sergio and the professor were making very good points. One offered money and strength, while the other offered wisdom and fame. There was no right answer between them given the choice. Either choice would change their lives for the better. However, it seemed that Jaku chose the only incorrect choice by not making a choice at all. "Meh. No thanks," he said, going back to sleep. Both the professor and Sergio were speechless. How could he not even be interested in whatever they were offering? Any sane man would at least hesitate before saying no. Just then, Jaku sat up from the ground and said, "Boss, can we go home now?" "Boss?" Sergio and the professor asked. They both turned to where Jaku was looking at, and lo and behold, it was none other than the golden-haired boy following Professor Lichtenstein. "Just a little bit more, Jaku. I just have a little bit of business here with the professor," he said to Jaku. Sergio's eyes widened. "Him? You?" the professor asked. "My boss decides anything for me, so my hands are tied," said Jaku. "Boss, deal with these people, please. I want to sleep." Silence reigned in the night as the two tried to process the information as best as they could. Sergio would never have thought that the nerd, who was always following the professor, would turn out to be the boss of this demi-human. "But he's just a kid," Sergio shouted. Meanwhile, the professor continued to stare at Michael, confused at his identity. He'd only spent a small amount of time with him, but he'd already treated Michael as Kyo, his protege. He completely forgot that he was a stranger who had a mysterious background. "You consider this guy your boss?" Sergio asked, sneering. "I assure you that whatever he offered you, the Aubert Company can offer 10 times more." Sergio felt that it was a waste that Jaku was under the employ of a teenage boy who didn't know anything about the world except history. He was a nobody. However, Jaku just laughed at his words. "Ha ha ha ha," and offered no other explanation. This made Sergio obviously angry. What did this kid have that he or the Aubert Company didn't? From his perspective, Jaku's future was endless. His achievement of becoming the first successful demi-human magnetic would be spread around the world. Even the conglomerates would be more than willing to have him under their employ. In other words, he deserved so much better. Sergio thought they could give him so much better. However, it seemed like the demi-human was far too stupid to notice that, and this infuriated him. It now seemed more than likely that he wasn't going to get the antique. And now, he just found out that the demi-human anomaly was actually the ally of the professor's protege. His father wasn't going to forgive him if he lost both the antique as well as the demi-human anomaly. He decided that he was going to go scorched earth. "You don't get to treat me like this," Sergio warned. "I've seen what you did to my brother." The rage in Sergio's face was barely hidden now. He had come from the Brownbloods healer and saw the extent of injuries in Mauricio's body. He had never seen his little brother so vulnerable. He was going to forget this slight if Jaku had just been a little bit smarter and accepted this glorious invitation. "Joining the Aubert Company could have been your salvation for hurting my brother like that. Choose, pay for your crimes, or join the Aubert Company," Sergio threatened. "Crime?" Jaku asked incredulously. Even the professor, who was hearing from a distance, couldn't help but scoff. "Is he serious?" "Shut up, Professor," warned Sergio. "I suggest that you tell this guy what I can do so that he can make a wise decision." Then he turned to Jaku. "Just because you defeated my brother doesn't mean you can defeat me. Your father will not allow for this," the professor shouted. You cannot threaten someone for not joining your company. Yes, I can. My father will never know, Sergio chuckled. He'll be too busy celebrating the fact that I gave him both the antique and this demi-human anomaly. The professor gritted his teeth. Sergio built an independent department for himself in the Aubert company. It was very well possible that with enough hushed tones, this little incident could become unnoticed by his father. Meanwhile, Jaku opened his eyes a little bit before closing it back up. Haha, you're willing to try, he said, imperceptibly looking at Michael. I'm fine with whatever since I'm not the one fighting. Sergio crossed his arms in his chest. That's right. You are still at the first stage of body formation. You have no power here. Instead, he turned to Michael and reached down his coat, revealing a mithril relic that was circular in nature and went around his knuckles. Once he equipped both chakrams in his hands, he bent his knees and assumed a cobra-like pose, ready to strike. Instead, I'm going to teach you the difference between a good leader and a bad one, Sergio smiled. Immediately, the professor got in front of Michael. Don't do this, Sergio. If you want to fight, you have to go through the proper means. You have to declare a duel. But Sergio shook his head. A duel would leave footprints. Footprints that his father could see. An unofficial battle, one that had no records at all of whatever happened tonight, was the one that benefited Sergio the most. Just then, the professor felt a hand on his shoulder. It's okay, Michael said. I'll fight him, Professor. Professor Lichtenstein looked at Kyo with disbelief. What? Are you crazy? Mauricio isn't the only one considered to be a genius in the Aubert family. Before he was born, Sergio was the one they hailed as the prodigy. Not only that, but he has already advanced far in his cultivation. Last I heard, he has already reached the 5th stage of body formation. 6th stage, Professor. I have just transcended onto the next stage just recently, Sergio corrected, smiling. He appreciated the compliment the professor gave him. At least he was acting normal. Meanwhile, the kid and the demi-human were looking at him weirdly, as if they were bored. You should heed your teacher's advice, boy. Surrender now and let the demi-human come over to my company. You may lose a once-in-a-generational talent, but at least you'll get to keep your life. Killing Michael was the only solution Sergio had for keeping Jaku in the Aubert company. But this was the worst mistake he made today. Michael sighed. You just had to threaten my life, he said disappointedly. He could already hear Harbinger inside his head celebrating. Seeing the look on Michael's face, the professor immediately tried to stop him. What are you doing? You can't fight him. Just accept defeat for now and we can ask for help later. Chief Klaus is just waiting for a chance to bite at the Auberts. He'll help us. But Michael still kept on walking towards Sergio, unafraid of that mithril relic chakram he held in his hands. Ugh. Fine. Just don't get killed. I'll ask for help from the werewolves. The professor whispered to him. Don't, Michael said, stopping the professor. What? Don't. I don't want anyone knowing about this, he said. Sergio laughed. Ha 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 ha. You're even more stupid than I thought. Michael ignored the professor's shocked gaze and stood face to face with Sergio. I'm not above teaching children a lesson, Sergio said as he reached down deep inside his heart and activated his ability. A burst of power emanated from him, the God-forged pieces in his heart glowing red and orange. Above him, the form of a humanoid man, wearing a black hood that obscured the top half of its face that went all the way to its torso. Going around its shoulder was the same weapon Sergio held in his hand, except this one burned with an eternal red flame. Beyond the blade were numerous other copies made out of the same red fire, making the illusion as if it was in an endless mirror. He's already advanced his diva this much? The professor exclaimed in disbelief. Be careful, Kyo. His ability allows him to create those spinning blades that will hit anything as they intersect in a circle. Just as the professor said that Sergio threw one of his weapons to the left, its inherent spin allowing it to curve in a perfect circular arc. As soon as flames lit up on the spinning blade, an instantaneous burst of fire appeared on the arc, completing the circle and splicing through everything it touched. it would have bisected Michael in half, but it seemed that he was able to step back just in time. "Lucky," said Sergio. "Looks like you survived thanks to the professor's warning." The chakram then arced back perfectly in Sergio's hands, landing on his palms. "Your luck won't last long," he said, before swinging his hands, with the circular weapon creating after-images behind its wake. And as his movements came to a stop, the after-images solidified into flaming chakrams, 10 in total. It floated above him and circled around his shoulders, mirroring the diva above his head. Sergio swung his arms forward like a wave, the flaming weapons rolling around his shoulders and launching towards Michael. Each one took different paths and speeds, and even if one wasn't a mathematical genius, they would see that the circular trail would perfectly coincide with Michael's position, including the one area around him. He had no chance to escape. Even with the professor's mortal senses, he knew Michael was in big trouble. But Michael didn't even try to move. Anyone with a basic amount of instinct would have definitely used their weapons to block the attack. Heck, even putting your hands up would be better than not doing anything at all. "Dodge!" the professor shouted. But Michael simply retrieved something from his pockets and threw it in the direction of the spinning blade head right towards him. It seemed like a simple move, yet it landed perfectly on the weapon's blade. Click! As soon as the arc of fire was about to reach Michael, it suddenly stopped in place, as if frozen in time. The rest of the weapons sliced through the air around Michael. While one remained in the air, its circular arc of flames paused. A second later, Michael stepped away with a casual step. "What?" Sergio shouted. Meanwhile, the professor was stunned in silence as he slowly looked up above Michael. There, he saw a diva with only its arms and chest visible in place. "You're a magnetic! You're a magnetic!" the professor exclaimed. And it seemed that Kyo, or whoever he was, wasn't just a newcomer in the realm as well. The diva looked to be halfway in completing its body formation. Even Sergio was stunned and shocked at seeing the supposed nerd turn out to be his peer. Michael was just about the same age as Mauricio, yet he was at the same body formation stage as Sergio. That was an insane gap. How did you reach the 6th stage of body formation?" Sergio asked, the flames fluttering as it felt the invisible pressure given off by the incomplete body of Harbinger. His pride was shattered. He didn't know what kind of ability power Michael had, but the fact that it could stop his own flames meant that it was stronger than his own even though they were just in the same stage of body formation. Somehow, a kid years younger than him was much more talented than he was. "Who are you really?" Sergio asked. There was no way that such a kid like Michael would be unknown to the world. He should be talked about in the same league as those legacies and powerhouses from the conglomerates. Yet, as far as he knew, no one yet knew about this golden-haired boy. "God damn it," Sergio cursed. He thought he'd finally found a way to please his father with the antique and the demi-human anomaly. He thought he'd finally get what he wanted. But no, this golden-haired boy just had to ruin his plans. And now, he was about to lose everything he'd built after all these years. That can't happen. His father can't know about this small mistake or else he'll take everything away. Sergio charged towards Michael. With both chakrams in hand, he spun in midair and dropped himself towards Michael. But instead of turning to face this threat, Michael instead turned towards the professor. "I'm sorry, Professor. I should have told you sooner," Michael apologized. "But this is me. My name is Michael and I am part of the Reborn company." The professor wanted to say something, but was extremely distracted by the fact that Sergio was right behind him, his arms outstretched and his body spinning like a top. But right as Sergio's blade was about to reach Michael, a satisfying click sound echoed throughout the open area. Sergio froze in place, completely still in midair. In his chest was an iron block, with ability power emanating from its surface and strangling the very God-forged pieces in his heart. After tossing the switch, Michael turned back to the professor and continued his words as if nothing ever happened. "As I was saying, Professor, I didn't mean to lie to you." The professor tried to mutter out any words, but could only open and close his mouth, speechless. He couldn't help but look at Sergio in the air. his eyes looking around as if he was trapped in his own body. A couple of moments later, Sergio was able to break free from Michael's switch, falling back down on the ground, fear in his heart. What? What? This isn't possible. How? Sergio cursed on the ground. He felt absolutely powerless facing Michael even though they should be evenly matched. It was unfair. He had only ever felt this way before back when he faced his father. This feeling of weakness in the face of absolute strength. It was draining the life out of his heart and filling it with dread. Just give up, Michael said to Sergio. It's done. You are defeated. This was a chance for Sergio to simply let go of the resentment in his heart and save himself from a fate worse than death. Yet he couldn't do it. His pride was in the way. What? You're going to let me go if I do? Sergio asked derisively. I knew it. A child like you does not have what it takes to achieve supreme power. Still weak in the knees from the effects of the switch, Sergio stumbled backwards, his index finger pointing at Michael. This is not over. I will have my revenge. Even if I lose everything, I will swear it upon my life that I will kill you and everyone else you love, Sergio declared. Michael couldn't help but sigh as he saw this sight. He gave Sergio a rope to pull himself up from a fate of doom. Yet instead, he chose to put it around his own neck instead. He was going to let him go if he had just apologized. But after that threat, Michael had no guilt in doing what he was about to do. He snapped his finger. And just as Sergio thought he could get away, he suddenly heard a clicking sound on his back. He looked behind him, only to see a strange graphite block on the middle of his shoulder blades. Then, he heard what seemed to be a wheel turning and cranking backwards like a reel. And suddenly, Sergio lost control of his own body. His legs stepped back one by one, perfectly reversing his movements from before. The professor watched in amazement as Sergio returned back from where he came, right in front of them. And as the effects of Michael's reverse cassette tape ended, Sergio snapped out of his stupor. He looked around, completely stunned at what happened. Just an instant ago, he was already halfway across the field. Sergio looked towards Michael and finally realized what kind of monster he'd been dealing with. His ability powers were insane. But it seemed that that wasn't the end of it. Michael raised his hand, palms pointed at Sergio's chest. A bad feeling emerged in Sergio's heart. He knew something wrong was about to occur. It was as if there was an invisible pressure clutching his heart and started yanking it away from his body. His body tried to fight the power by releasing ability power throughout his whole form, a defensive mechanism built into every magnetic out there, but felt nothing but weakness overcome it instead. The more he fought, the weaker he got. It wasn't before the first drop of Godforge piece left his chest and started to float towards Michael did he finally understand what was happening. He was losing his ability power. The diva above Sergio's head started to wane out of existence, blurring and flashing as more and more pieces of Godforge exited out of his body. The professor gasped at the sight. What? Godforge pieces, he muttered. He had never seen these mythical pieces of metal look so obedient. They had a reputation for being indomitable, pure, and unconquerable. The white fire that surrounded them burned any and everything it touched, meaning that one couldn't force it to move unless they wanted their fingers to be deleted out of existence. Yet now, the professor was seeing drops of Godforge shoot towards Michael's chest, entering into his skin harmlessly as if being absorbed by it. It didn't leave a hole in Michael's body. It just simply passed through it. No! Sergio muttered, falling to his knees, as his last bit of strength left his body. The diva above him fizzled out, forever lost. The professor looked at Michael, 1,000 questions running through his mind. The Godforge pieces. They chose you, the professor muttered in disbelief. His eyes were darting around as he began to put the pieces together. History records have only one explanation for this occurrence, he said. A natural magnetic. Michael nodded, confirming the professor's suspicions. In truth, he could have kept it a secret from him even now, but he decided that it would be better for the professor to know. After all, he was the one most knowledgeable about the ancient era and the people that resided in it. Perhaps he could give him the answers he'd been wanting to find. "That's right, Professor. I am a natural magnetic," he confessed. The professor felt weak in the knees, almost collapsing on the ground. He put his hands on his forehead and said, "I can't believe it. All this time I've been trying to get closer and closer to ancient humans with the antique. But I didn't know that he was just right beside me." Then the professor lunged at Michael and began examining his chest. "What did you feel? Did it hurt? How do the God-forged pieces know to go to your heart?" Michael felt overwhelmed with all of the professor's questions. His eyes had the same intense and crazy passion he had when he was talking about the antique. "Slow down, Professor. One question at a time." The professor shook his head and tried to compose himself. But the excitement he felt from his entire body couldn't be contained, manifesting as a nervous shaking in his hands. There were so many things that he wanted to ask Michael, but didn't know which one to ask. "Boss, can we go home now?" Meanwhile, Jaku couldn't help himself and called out to them from a distance. The professor turned to look at the Dragonborn and immediately remembered that Michael wasn't even the only person he had a million questions to. "You! And you!" the professor shouted, pointing at both of them. He took a second of pause before clapping his head, realizing something. "So that's why." Just as he said that, he suddenly clutched his head with both hands. "Ugh! Too much. My brain is heating up." Professor Lichtenstein held his head in pain as he began to juggle two topics at once. First one was obvious, of course, with Michael turning out to be a natural magnetic, something thought only to be as a thing of legends and myths. Second was Jaku, the demi-human anomaly, who had somehow achieved something no one ever thought was possible: becoming a magnetic. Both of these were intricately tied to the ancient era as well as the modern era. Natural magnetics were thought to have been extinct ever since the ancient era was over. Meanwhile, a demi-human magnetic was something that was only theorized to be possible in the future. They were supposed to be the next step of the evolution for the living beings in this world. Those two ideas were separated by thousands of years of history, yet they were in parallel to each other. They were two sides of the same coin. Erg! The professor spent his whole life searching for every single piece of clue about the mystery of the world for his entire life. He was accustomed to only getting a small piece of evidence, a fragment, a shattered piece, or a burned page, that slowly gave him more and more images about what happened in the ancient era. He would never get a clear picture, only a hazy one. But now, he was looking at two completely intact physical evidences of the mystery of the world in the form of Michael and Jaku. It was as if the professor had spent his entire life living in a desert, searching for just a tiny drop of water, and now suddenly found himself in the middle of an ocean, drowning. It was information overload. "Too much! Too much! Too much!" the professor shouted. He frantically clutched his head as it pulsated, trying to contain all the neurons firing in his brain. At first, Michael thought that the professor was just overacting, something that was just part of the professor's crazy personality. But then he realized that the professor was actually getting hurt. The pain in his face was real. Not only that, but the light mana in his brain and skull was in complete disarray. It was bouncing all over the place, having an enormous amount of activity that wasn't normal at all. His mana was moving too fast and too chaotically to be considered safe. "Professor!" Something was happening to him, and it couldn't be explained by normal science or magic. Michael used his drone and let it hover above the professor, just a mere inch away from him. And there, he saw the root cause of the problem. A small piece of ability power had wormed itself into the professor's brain. It was subtle. If a normal first-stage magnetic had an ability power thread as thin as a finger, then the one in the professor's head was even smaller than the width of a hair. He wouldn't have even noticed if he wasn't actively searching for an anomaly. "What's going on, Professor?" he asked. But it was at that moment that the thin thread of ability power suddenly expanded outwards, spreading around like vines that clung onto the professor's neurons. The professor inwardly gasped, his eyes rolling back, before passing out on the ground, cold. Michael was alarmed. "Professor Lichtenstein," he called out. Thankfully, the professor's light mana around his body was still stable, meaning that his health wasn't in any danger at all. However, his head was a completely different story. The ability power threads had completely taken over the professor's brain, like an overgrown dead tree that grew from the back of his skull. And because of this strange mess, the professor's brain activity completely came to a stop, with the neurons' glow slowly fading before becoming frozen. His brain was technically dead, yet his body was completely fine. What's happening? Is he all right, Harbinger? The only other person who could explain this was a diva. This professor of yours is not normal. He's a crazy son of a bitch. What? Harbinger manifested above Michael's head, taking control of it. He moved his mechanical arms and pointed it to the very source of the professor's problem. The thin thread of ability power that started this all. That is a Godforge piece, Harbinger revealed. What? Michael shouted out loud. He was actually speechless for a second, not knowing how to even process that. But how could a Godforge piece even get to the professor's brain? That's why I told you he's insane. How else could it have gotten there if he didn't put it there himself? Michael was completely flabbergasted. Back in his previous life, he had heard of nightmare scenarios in which people performed cosmetic surgery on themselves in order to conform to a certain beauty standard like thicker lips or sharper nose. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that even in this world, people would try to perform surgery on themselves in order to become a magnetic. People would do anything to become powerful. Michael understood that, no matter how crazy it may seem. However, he couldn't understand why the professor would put a Godforge piece in his head. That was literally crazy. There was no reason to put oneself in such extreme danger. It achieved nothing. A Godforge piece only gave power to a person if it was in their heart because it allowed ability power to pulsate and spread throughout their body like blood in the veins. Michael stared at the professor, wondering if he had really been dealing with a lunatic. So how do I save him? No matter how crazy he was, Michael still treated the professor as his friend. He couldn't just let him die like this. Can I get the Godforge piece from his brain? He could beckon the Godforge piece to come towards him just like what he did with Sergio. But Harbinger advised against it. If you want to kill him, then sure. The Godforge piece is what caused him to be in such a critical state. But it's also what's keeping him alive. You have to let whatever process is currently in and let it do its thing. Interrupting it will only cause more damage. Michael bit his lips, feeling guilty. How did this even happen? Is it because of me? The professor only got to this state because of his discovery of the truth about Michael's real strength and heritage. He would have never thought that revealing such a secret would cause such peril for the professor. If he knew, he wouldn't have revealed all of it at once. He shook his head. Regret wasn't going to do anything. The only thing he could do was keep the professor safe and hope that he'd come out safe at the end of all this. He looked around and saw nothing but the tall pine trees of the werewolf forest around him. With the full moon in the night sky, the entire scenery looked peaceful and quiet. However, this was not a good place for the professor to be. He didn't want to let anything suddenly cause the professor to be disturbed. The Godforge piece was deliberately put near the hypothalamus. In such a delicate spot, Michael didn't know if a single bump in the head would cause the Godforge piece to suddenly jolt out of place, completely disrupting the process that it was currently in. He'd be safer in the nation of Reborn. Jaku, help me get the professor up. Jaku's entire body coursed with lightning as he immediately arrived right next to Michael, his hands carrying the foot of the professor. He knew that this was a serious situation. Michael then used his teleportation skill immediately, with the shadow expanding from his feet and quickly enveloping the three of them in a dome of darkness. But just as the skill was about to trigger, Michael suddenly felt the hairs on the back of his head suddenly stand up in warning. The shadow dome burst like a bubble, dissipating into a fine mist. Michael looked up, searching for the person responsible for this ambush. And in the distance, he saw a single figure floating in the skies, their face obscured by the shadow caused by the full moon behind them. They stood there, motionless, looking down at him. Immediately, Michael felt a sense of power within them that triggered his fight or flight response. It was overwhelming to the point where his invisible, absolute unity defense, automatically activated to counteract the pressure. If not, then he would feel his chest almost cave in, his ribs close to breaking. Whoever this was, they were not a normal person. They were a magnetic. Wanting to find out more, Michael piloted his drone to tilt upwards, focusing on the stranger's body. And there he saw a familiar sight. Their entire body lit up with ability power, from head to toe, and even to the tips of their fingers. It originated from the heart, filled with God-forged pieces that were blinding like the sun. From there, ability power threads spread around their entire body like roots, the same way as the mass on the professor's brain. Ability power was ingrained into their very body, their very figure, as if it was another set of veins that delivered not blood, but a reality-altering power. Michael hadn't felt this kind of way ever since the auction, when he faced Alaric. This person was in the nascent spirit realm. Michael was sure of it. But despite the massive gap in power, Michael was able to compose himself. He'd already faced a nascent spirit realm when he was only in the 4th stage of body formation. He was now in the 6th stage. His hand subtly reached for the battery in his chest, with its capacity still at 20% charge, just enough for one single execution of quantum step. That was the only technique that could work on a person who was already beyond the body formation realm. "Who are you?" the figure asked, her voice feminine. The female figure slowly floated down towards Michael, her face now finally being illuminated by the light. She was a fair-skinned woman. She looked young, with no wrinkles or age marks to show experience, but ChatJK5 assessed her to be in her late 20s or early 30s. Her hair was silvery white, which flowed freely behind her. She wore a black robe, whose hood laid and used on her back. Underneath the robe was no sign of armor at all, yet Michael got the impression that she didn't need armor at all to defend herself. It was hard for him to guess her background. She had no easily identifiable clothing that would indicate her ethnicity or her culture, nor did she have any insignias that proudly told everyone their heritage. She was a complete mystery, and that seemed to be on purpose. "She's wearing a disguise," Harbinger muttered. "She's using a technique to change her features." When Michael changed his perspective to his own eyes, he suddenly saw that her face had changed. It was no longer the fair-faced woman with young features. Instead, it was now an older woman, with wrinkles that showed her wisdom throughout all the years. "The face that you're seeing right now is the disguise. But thanks to our drone vision, we can see her true face." "Who are you?" she asked again. This time her voice was cold, as if warning Michael that she wasn't going to ask a third time. Michael shot the question back at her. "Who are you?" The fact that she had to disguise herself at all meant that she had something to hide. The two stared at each other, neither backing off. The woman raised her eyebrows, surprised that a boy would dare act like this in front of her. He wasn't ignorant either. She could feel his God-forged pieces. She knew he was barely in the 6th stage of body formation, which meant that his instincts should tell him that she was not someone that he could deal with. Yet he still had that look on his face, as if he was ready to attack as soon as she moved. In the end, she could only attribute it to his youth. "Get away from the professor," she warned. Michael stayed still and put himself forward, shielding Jakku and the professor behind him. "What do you want with the professor?" he asked the woman. The woman frowned back at him. "I should be asking you that question. Why did the professor activate his failsafe?" "What?" She opened her mouth and was about to explain, when all of a sudden, they both felt a sudden change in the air. It was a buildup of power that went from 0 to 100 in about a few tenths of a second. "Get away from the professor," she shouted. But this time it wasn't a threat. It was a concerned warning. Michael turned around, seeing the professor's body start glowing in a blue ethereal glow filled with ability power. It was pulsating, its frequency getting higher and higher as the time passed. Michael's intuition was telling him one thing. This was a bomb. And suddenly, he felt a huge gust of wind in front of him. When his vision came to, he saw the white-haired woman kneeling right in front of him, her hand caressing the side of the professor's face. "You hold his head up." The woman turned to look up at Michael, but suddenly saw him standing 2 feet closer than he actually was. It made her pause for a second. How did he get there? She was sure that he was standing about a meter away from the professor. But now he was only half a meter ahead. Confusion was visible on her face, her eyes blinking as if she was doubting her own vision. He shouldn't have been able to move that fast. Just then, she felt the professor's body violently tremble. Took her focus back on what was important. She could only attribute this strange occurrence to her already chaotic mental state. Meanwhile, microscopical tears in reality were still trying to fix themselves around Michael's fist after he used his quantum step. Seeing her move like that, it made him instinctively use this technique to save the professor. But he stopped midway when he realized something. When he looked at the woman, he realized that there was no ill intent on her face. She looked at the professor with care. He could see the look of worry in her eyes as she gazed at the old man. "Sleep," she said as she raised her finger and traced it from the top of the professor's head to the bottom of his chin. As soon as she did, the pulsating blue glow on the professor's skin dimmed, before the power building up inside him slowly turned dormant once again. It was safe for now. "What did you find out?" she mindlessly muttered underneath her breath as she looked at the professor. Michael, realizing that this woman may not be the enemy he thought she was, raised a question. "What's happening to him?" The woman looked up at Michael, her eyes squinting as she observed him up close. His strange disposition was still lingering on her mind. There were a lot of things she didn't know about Michael. Like why he was with the professor, however. She could see that he didn't mean any harm either. He was just defensive because he wanted to protect the professor. After a few seconds, she began to explain. "His brain has shut down in order to preserve his body. It's a failsafe that he put into himself in order to assure that he would be able to process the immense amount of information that he gathered." It seemed that the professor really did experience an information overload. The revelations that he had just uncovered were far too much for his normal brain to process, causing this failsafe to trigger. "Why would he do that?" The woman chuckled. "He's always been a great hoarder of knowledge. Even when it's too much for his mortal brain to comprehend, he goes beyond his own limits to understand it." Reminiscing about the professor made the woman let down her guard for just a brief moment. But she immediately put on a stone-cold face as soon as she noticed. "That is the only thing I'm going to tell you for your goodwill. I see that you were simply protecting him," she said as she started to stand up with the professor in her hands. "Wait, you can't take him away," Michael said, trying to stop her. "He's in great need of attention," she argued. "I know a great healer," Michael argued back, but the woman shook her head. "This is a special case. Only we know how to wake the professor from this state." Michael paused. "And how can I trust you?" He had no idea who she was and what she planned to do with the professor. "It's because we're part of the same organization," she revealed. The woman then reached down into the professor's wrist covered by his long white coat. Just below his palms, there was a tattoo of a sun with 8 distinct rays with a completely different style. Michael recognized them to be representations of the 8 mana elements: water, earth, fire, wind, lightning, poison, dark, and light. The woman then pulled down the collar of her black robe, revealing the very same tattoo on the bottom of her clavicle. That's not a normal tattoo, he realized. It was laced with ability power, meaning that it wouldn't be erased by normal means. It looked like even after a severe injury, the tattoo would still recover as if it was her own skin. "Whoever placed those tattoos is not simple," Harbinger said. "You should try and fight them." Michael ignored that last part. This tattoo seemed to really prove that this woman and the professor were part of the same organization. The question now became, who were they? Upon first impressions, the professor didn't look to be the kind of guy who would waste his time being in an organization. All he would want to do was study history. He was a lone wolf in that regard. So he was curious to see what kind of people they were and their goals. He assumed it aligned with the professor's seeing as he had that tattoo on his wrist. "And what organization is that?" he asked the woman. She quickly pulled back her collar, hiding the tattoo. "You don't need to know. He and ChatJK5 hadn't heard or known about any group with this kind of special symbol. It could have been from a small, unknown group in the middle of nowhere, but that was unlikely. Since they had at least one member who was in the nascent spirit realm, they definitely couldn't have been from a small organization. They must be a group that was in the same league as the conglomerates. I need to know what organization you are in if you're going to take the professor away, Michael asserted. The woman looked at him and said, I'll tell you this. The professor is an extremely important figure within our organization. His deep knowledge and insight within the history of the world is vital to our goals. Without him, the very structure of our organization will crumble. People from all over the world will mourn. Ideas that had been growing and molding for hundreds of years will go kaput, and our hope as a species will be lost. Trust me when I say that we will not let him die. I promise you that. Or else our whole world will deteriorate even more than what it is now. Michael raised his eyebrows as the woman began her preamble about the professor's importance in their organization and to the world as a whole. He knew that the professor was an important figure due to his knowledge about history, but he never thought that it would go this deep. He never thought that the fate of the world would depend on it. As it turned out, Professor Lichtenstein wasn't just a crazy dude obsessed with history. He was actually someone important in an organization that seemed to have its roots spread all over the globe. He could tell by the way her light mana was fluctuating that she was getting emotional talking about the professor. That wouldn't come from someone lying. After hearing all this, he couldn't help but be curious about this secret organization of theirs. Why hadn't he heard about it till now? Why do they need the professor? Who is this woman? He was filled with questions but had no one to answer them. The woman was adamant in keeping her secrets, and Michael didn't feel exactly comfortable pressuring someone from the nascent spirit realm to spill the tea. Just then, the professor's body began to glow with a blue light and pulsate again. It's acting up again, she said worriedly. I have to get him back to our base. The woman carried the professor with both hands as she floated away from where she came. This time, Michael didn't stop her. He didn't know anything about the professor's failsafe. He doubted he'd be able to cure him of this affliction, so the best chance for the professor's recovery was to let him be scurried off by someone who knew him well. Just as she was about to disappear off into the horizon, she turned around and faced Michael. Thank you for saving my father, she said, before blinking out of existence. Michael stared at the skies, still reeling from that encounter. He couldn't believe that revealing such things to the professor would lead him to activate his failsafe and lure a nascent spirit cultivator right in front of him. Now, he had no choice but to trust that the professor would soon recover from his strange self-imposed affliction. Still, she's his daughter? I would have never guessed that. She only revealed that right before she left, so Michael didn't have the time to ask her more about it. However, it did give him more trust in her. Will I meet her again? He pondered. It wasn't just her he was curious about, but the entire secret organization behind her. Just from her description earlier, it seemed to be an organization that was focused on humanity's survival, which Michael was a fan of. But with such a straightforward goal, he wondered why they would even keep their organization a secret. This was a deep rabbit hole that would keep his mind in a wandering state filled with unending questions. Thankfully, someone interrupted him in time. Boss! That was something? Jaka said, wiping the sweat off his brows. I know, but you held up well on your own, Michael complimented. Most first-stage magnetics would pass out from the mere presence of a nascent spirit magnetic. But even through all the shaking and shivering, Jaku remained upright. Congrats on the breakthrough. Jaka smiled, with his diva manifesting above him. It was a giant dark blue egg with lightning streaks all over its surface. Most of it was cracked, looking to be on the very verge of hatching. Michael had seen this before. Shiina also had an egg for a diva before it hatched into its new form. A white baby dragon. Why hasn't it hatched? He asked Jaku. Jaku raised his eyebrow. Hatched. It was at that moment that the egg diva above his head suddenly started to twitch and tremble, part of its surface starting to flake off. Whoa! As the flakes dropped off, a blinding light emanated out of the cracks. And as more and more cracks and pieces started to flake off, the more intense the activity that happened inside the diva itself. As the shaking reached a crescendo, the egg stopped moving for a second. Then, it exploded into a blinding light. Michael and Jaku closed their eyes, with only their bodies feeling the invisible pressure of the diva's ability power emanating outwards. Once the light settled down, Michael and Jaku set their sights on the true form of Jaku's diva. It was a baby dragon, still in its infancy. It inherited Jaku's dark blue scales, yet each of it seemed to be imbued with live lightning, still streaking and arcing even though it was embedded inside. Its limbs were sleek, wings sharp. Its eyes were a stormy gray, as if it was the dark thunderstorm clouds that became the birth of pure lightning strikes. It perked up upon seeing Michael, lightning arcing through its tail and towards the top of its head. And immediately upon its birth, the dark blue-scaled dragon curled up into a ball and began to sleep. Michael almost chuckled after seeing this scene. He finally understood why Jaku only now hatched his diva. It was because he was lazy, just like him. The only reason why it didn't hatch right after his breakthrough was because it still wanted to sleep comfortably in its shell. "I'm so jealous," Jaku said, his eyes starting to become heavy. "I want to sleep too." But before Jaku could drift off into his dreams, Michael demanded a step-by-step explanation as to what happened during his breakthrough, as well as his new ability power. And after Jaku relayed it back to him, Michael was intrigued. So his ability relies on him being lazy? How fitting. "Boss, can we go home now? My throat is kinda sore." "Okay. Yeah, sure." Michael was about to activate his shadow teleportation skill when he made a cursory glance at Jaku's throat. Since Jaku said it was sore, he thought that it was a simple sickness that could be cured with some honey lemon tea. But then he noticed that Jaku's light mana wasn't actually in disarray. It looked completely fine. "Are you sure?" he asked Jaku again. "Yeah, boss," Jaku replied, massaging his throat. "Ever since that weird thing happened, my throat's been sore ever since." Michael raised his eyebrow. "What weird thing?" Jaku then began to explain the last part of his fight with Mauricio and the other swordsman. "I knew that if the other swordsman escaped, then I would lose the tournament. I couldn't let that happen, so I just followed that weird feeling I had in my heart." "What was it?" Michael asked. Jaku scratched the back of his head, feeling quite awkward to share this thought out loud. "It was dominance, boss. I wanted to be the only one who was fast. Those other swordsmen, they didn't deserve their quickness. Only I can be fast. And I don't know what happened after I followed that feeling. But soon after, I regained my sanity and I suddenly saw the swordsman lose control. So I took that advantage and won the tournament." Michael listened to Jaku's recollection and couldn't help but be confused yet again. "What? Jaku caused the other swordsmen to lose their speed? I thought his ability power allowed him to get speed after being lazy, not take it from others. Those were two completely different powers." The only conclusion he could think of was that Jaku awakened two ability powers, which was strange, but not inconceivable. His throat hurt after that? Using an ability power doesn't make your body fatigued. It only tires out the Godforge pieces and the heart. He would have thought that this sore throat was simply a hallucination from Jaku, but after observing him using the drone vision, he realized that something had changed within Jaku. On his throat, right underneath the voice box, there was an entirely new part made entirely out of ability power. It was made out of these threads of ability power that were woven together to create a cascading set of fabric around Jaku's throat. What the hell is that? It didn't seem like an ordinary use of ability power. It wasn't like his quantum techniques, nor something that a nascent spirit realm magnetic was doing with their bodies. If those had ability power being used as veins to transmit strength, then this new thing on Jaku's throat had ability power being used as an entirely new organ. "Harbinger, what am I looking at?" "Kukuku. Come on. The goddess already told you about it." Michael's memory flashed back to that time when he hallucinated his meeting with the bratty goddess. She mentioned something about Kuno the original vampire, as well as the Iron Maiden / Gaia. But it wasn't just that. He remembered her saying something about the Dragonborns and how they were so close to awakening their true power. Was this it? Jakku could stop someone's speed with just his voice. No ability can do that. This was something more powerful, something more ancient. Michael couldn't help but feel disappointed that the professor wasn't here with him right now. He was the only one with an answer about what kind of power Jakku really had. Was it just his own unique power, or was it inherent to all Dragonborns? He guessed that it may be something only unique to Jakku since Shiina awakened her ability before his, but didn't exhibit any signs of this strange voice power. But I can't rule it out completely. There's a lot of things that I don't know about this new power. Maybe Shiina simply hadn't had the opportunity to stumble upon it. Either way, he would only have an answer once the professor recovers, which was an indefinite timeline. You know, there's a better way for you to find out the truth. Michael raised his eyebrows. And how would I do that? Cook. Just put them in a life or death situation. They'd surely awaken their powers then. He shook his head. Harbinger, as always, treated the end result as the absolute truth. As long as they won in the end, the way to do it didn't matter. You know, just as he was conversing with Harbinger in the void of his mind, he noticed something. Harbinger's entire torso was now visible to him. He now had a complete arm and a complete upper body. The only thing that was still obscured by that dark fog was his head and his 2 legs. What? When did this happen? Oh, you didn't know? We advanced to the 7th stage of body formation. Michael's jaws dropped. How could he have not noticed that such a huge advancement took place? Sergio's Godforge pieces were enough for us to go to the next level. Sergio was in the 6th stage of body formation, meaning that he had in total 21 kilograms in his heart. That was 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus 5 plus 6 is equal to 21. For someone to advance to the 7th stage, they would normally only need 7 kilos of Godforge pieces. But because Michael needed 3 times the usual amount compared to magnetics, he needed 21 kilos of Godforge pieces, the exact amount that Sergio had. Michael couldn't help but slap his own head. All this time, he'd thought that he would only get 6 kilos of Godforge pieces from someone in the 6th stage of body formation. But Michael had a good reason. When he defeated those hooded figures that were trying to scam the royal blood vampires, he only got a few kilograms of Godforge pieces from them. He incorrectly assumed that it would be the same with Sergio. Why was that different? I should have gotten a lot more kilos of Godforge pieces from those guys. We only got the Godforge pieces that are useful to us. The rest were no good. They were impure. Huh? Harbinger shrugged. They were impure, so your natural magnetism won't work on them. And even if you force it, then you would only corrupt our cultivation. Michael still couldn't understand it. How could they be impure? I don't know. It seemed that Harbinger really didn't know the reason why those Godforge pieces were impure. Heck, Michael didn't even think that anyone even knew that Godforge pieces could be impure. He had never heard of the term at all. Those Godforge pieces are impure, so they weren't useful to me. This was yet another mystery in the world that he had no answer to. However, he did have a clue on how to solve it. The answer lay in none other than those hooded figures. If he could interact with them again, he could verify if they truly did have an impure Godforge piece. And if so, figure out what it was and how they obtained it. Meanwhile, near the center of New Sparta, 3 legendary figures were having a little conversation deep into the night. On the front was the draconian Zoviru, with his red hair and fiery eyebrows. Opposite him was the blind old woman, who turned out to be the Way of the Sword Heavenly Knight from the Order. On the left was Chief Lupin of the Brown Blood tribe, and on the right was his blood brother and rival, Chief Klaus from the Gold Blood tribe. Such a gathering of powerful figures did not go unseen in their surroundings. There were piercing eyes coming from the different dragon towers around them. There was a clear absence of howls from the other werewolf tribes, as if they were deliberately trying to keep themselves in stealth. There were invisible shadows darting around, trying to get a read on their conversation, and there were some cloaked figures blending themselves in whose breathing was almost invisible thanks to the gills on their neck. "The antique," Sword Mistress Eldia muttered, glancing at the giant white bones staked on the ground. It hasn't been broken, yet there were clear signs of someone awakening it, the ancient roar. The three leaders stayed silent. Eldia couldn't help but sigh. It is clear what we must do. We must band together in order to fight against the would-be figures that would act because of this discovery. It is the only way for peace. But I can see that none of you want to do it. I am more than willing to commit to an allyship, Chief Lupin said. But as you can see, Sword Mistress, my brother is less enthused. The giant gray wolf muttered a very low growl, one that signaled hostility and resentment. I would rather die. That may very well be the case if we don't pool our forces, Sword Mistress Eldia declared. Then so be it, Chief Klaus muttered before quickly turning around and facing the rest of his tribe. I do not deal with traitors. Wolves, back to base. Awoo! Tens of gray wolves howled at the moon before running back into the fog, returning to their tribe. Chief Klaus didn't look back. However much anger and bitterness there was in Chief Klaus, it seemed that Chief Lupin didn't feel the same way. There was a brief moment of sadness in the giant brown wolf's eyes as he looked at the fleeting figure of his brother, before his eyes steeled and remained cool. You have your answer, Sword Mistress. The brown bloods and the gold bloods will never be whole, Chief Lupin said as he gestured for the rest of his tribe to retreat back to their base. The Sword Mistress could only shake her head after seeing the two blood brothers act so cold against each other. Liars, she muttered. Despite such a disagreement between the two, she could still see a hint of love between the two. They were just too prideful to admit it. Now there were just two of them left. How about you, Draconian? Zoviru shrugged, looking bored and uninterested. It is not in my blood to ally myself with you or anyone else. But if you were to point me into the direction of those bastards, then I shall gladly rip them to shreds for you. And with those words, Zoviru turned back and entered the red portal to his dragon tower, leaving Eldia alone with her attendants. What now, Sword Mistress? Eldia sighed. I can only hope for a miracle. Numerous lives will depend on whether those two manage to settle their differences. As for us, we shall continue our journey. We must find whoever awakened that ancient roar.